If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
In honor of the spooky season, what is your most haunted horror experience or spooky paranormal encounter story that still freaks you out?
My childhood friend lived right next to a graveyard, one of the oldest in our town. Her bedroom windows faced it, and it was across from just a small road between the house and graveyard, not a street, just a side road, so I stayed over, and at midnight we watched as an old-fashioned dressed woman drifted among the stones. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My friend and her 5 sisters were used to it and not scared at all. We were about 15. I've never seen anything like that again in my life. What an experience. One night around 2 a.m., I was home alone and heard someone whisper my name from the hallway. I froze, thinking maybe I imagined it. Then my bedroom door creaked open, slowly, on its own. I grabbed a bat and walked out, but no one was there. All windows were locked. I checked the footage on my door camera the next morning and saw a shadow standing at my door at 1:59 a.m., but no one ever came in. I was house sitting for my parents and decided to take a nap one afternoon before I went to work. I was only snoozing for about 10 minutes when I heard the downstairs front door fly open and my mom's voice talking super loudly. Then I heard shuffling noises like the rolling of suitcases and bags being brought in. My mom's voice sounded super distraught, and I assumed they had to cut their trip short because of plane scheduling issues or something. I really didn't want to get up because I was super tired, but I figured I should go downstairs to see what was going on and if they needed help bringing their stuff in. I got up and opened my bedroom door, and I heard my mom's voice echoing up through the stairwell clear as day, talking to my dad about how disappointed she was about something. I descend the stairs, turn the corner into the kitchen, and I hear nothing. Everything went completely quiet. There was nobody in the house. I raced around calling, "Mom? Mom?" throughout the house, but to no avail. They were not there. Immediately I called her number. She answered and confirmed that they were still on their trip several states away. I have no idea what I heard in my house that day. I've chalked it up to a very realistic dream. But I know I was wide awake, so I don't know. I have. Several times. My favorite story is that my sorority house was haunted. I went to a college close to where the Battle of Gettysburg took place. The town did have a connection to that battle. It was also notorious for being haunted. Anyway, my sorority house was an old Victorian that sat on a steep hill. We called it the Psycho House for obvious reasons. Through the years that the sorority occupied it, so many sisters had experiences. Some sisters even saw full-body apparitions. One day, in the summer, I was in the downstairs living room. My bedroom was on the first floor as well. There was only one other sister in the house at the time. She and her boyfriend, now husband, were cooking dinner in her upstairs apartment. So, the house was super quiet. I went to get something from my bedroom, and as I passed by the stairwell, I saw a white figure hovering a few inches off the ground in the middle of it. It was quite an experience. One day I came home from school. I was in 7th grade, and at the time I would get home around 4 p.m. and be alone until my mom came home. Dad was working out of town, and Mom got home about 10 at night. My uncle's girlfriend would take care of my little sister. My uncle also lived with me but wouldn't arrive home until about 8 p.m., after picking up my little sister from his girlfriend's. I recall returning home, having a meal, and then retreating to my room to play video games. As I was lying about to put in my headphones, I heard my front door open, followed by what I thought were high heels clacking on the floor. I did not pay much attention to it, as my uncle's girlfriend consistently wore high heels, and I assumed she was simply dropping off my sister or retrieving something from my uncle's room. The heels just kept on clacking until they got to my door, and when I opened up the door to see who it was, there was no one there. I remember calling my uncle to ask if his girlfriend had come over for something, and he sounded bewildered as he told me to call the cops if anything was out of order. I looked around, and nothing looked out of place, even the door was locked just as I had locked it when I came in the house. A couple of years later I meet my new neighbor at school, and he starts to tell me about activity that he is experiencing at his house. One day I tell him my story, and his eyes widen, and he tells me he has had this happen to him multiple times. Then, a couple weeks later, he tells me that his dad spoke to the landlord and told him about how the plot of land where my house is, along with my other neighbors, used to be a horse farm, and more especially, the plot where our houses are was basically where they ended horses when they broke their legs or were too old. To this day I sometimes hear faint trotting outside my window and even the sound of a horse neighing. I still cannot be in my home with 2 headphones in because of this, especially when home alone. I had a few when I was younger. There was what I described as a shadowy little boy living in our house. I have a memory of seeing him run down a hallway and turn around a corner, and another memory of him standing by the front door. In another house, my family lived on an old farm, and I remember seeing what I thought was a ghost standing in the door to the barn. We were in the kitchen and looked out from the kitchen window to the barn and could see someone standing in the barn door. My memory of it is that the person was transparent, but you could tell they were wearing a hat and overalls. My mom and dad saw the person too, and my dad went out to look but didn't see anything. In yet another house, my brothers and I saw what we thought was the tooth fairy. We were in our upstairs bedroom and saw a ball of light fly through the room and out the door. We chased it out the bedroom door, around the corner, and down the stairs, and it flew out, through the glass, in the living room. All three of us still wonder what it could have possibly been. My brother said he would see a black angel at our bedroom window sometimes. The black angel would be carrying a net. He would get frightened and wake me up crying that the black angel was at the window again, but I never saw it. Now that I'm an adult, I've experienced what sounded like boots walking across my bedroom in the middle of the night, and once I woke up and could have sworn that someone who looked like an old grandma or something was standing over my wife's side of the bed, sort of hunched over looking at her. When I was 15, I stayed at a vacation home in Maine. My brother and I slept in the basement, which you could walk outside from, and our parents slept on the second floor in the loft. At 4 a.m. on our second day I woke up because it sounded like a man was stomping up and down the steps. After a few minutes of pacing, I became irritated and stepped into the hall. I had the intention of telling my dad/brother to knock it off and go walk around outside. I instead found my very ticked off mother coming down the stairs. She'd heard the stomping too and was coming to tell me and my brother to knock off whatever it was we were doing. We checked in on my brother, who was out cold in his room. It wasn't him. And it wasn't my dad. Both of us went back to bed confused. The same thing happened again every morning we were there at the same time. We stayed at that house a week. And came back the next year and the year after. Whatever it was seemed harmless. All he wanted to do was get up and down every morning. I believe I grew up in a haunted house. Things would move on their own, disappear, or things that we never bought would appear. My parents believed that the strange occurrences were simply due to having young children and pets. Well, after my first sibling, I had an imaginary friend who I called Ella. Ella was about 4 years old, with brown eyes, a white and red dress, and no face. I would play with her every single day. I always would include her in every drawing. I also refused to sleep with the closet door open because the shadow man lived there. Ella would protect me from him but was scared of the shadow man. Years went by, and eventually we moved out of the house. I never once mentioned Ella or even remembered her until recently when we visited family who lived near where we used to. And asked if I ever learned more about Ella, and I was confused about what she meant by that. After doing some research, I discovered that the original occupants of the area in the 1850s were Ella and the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man ended Ella and buried her in the ground under my room, the only place I saw her. 100-year-old house in an area of the country that has been inhabited forever and fought over repeatedly. We have a soldier that patrols through the house, so it's more the land than the house for him. He wears a red coat and stops to watch computer screens from time to time. We will catch him out of the corner of our eye. We have a woman who sobs upstairs. She is harmless but is very sad and appears bloody when seen. There is a horse outside that runs down the sidewalk on occasion. It's white, and it can be heard and sometimes seen. Black orbs go through the ceilings and floors. A Native American man appeared to my daughter, who tends to be sensitive to such things. A lady in black can be seen upstairs as well. Things go missing, loud crashes happen at night with no cause, and it sounds like someone is running down or up the stairs occasionally. I saw a black shadow of a young man standing on my neighbor's roof one morning in full daylight. Honestly, they don't bother us, and on the occasions when we have had one come in, we needed to get out. The house has felt empty after cleansing, and we were happy when our regulars returned. I feel like my house is haunted, and I don't exactly know what to do. Last night, I experienced something strange. Either my door glitched, or a ghost was possessing it, because while I was sitting on my bed, the door randomly opened and closed. The fan wasn't on, my dog was downstairs sleeping, and my father was also downstairs watching a movie. My mother was at work, so it couldn't have been her. It wasn't even that late, it was around 9:20 p.m., a time when weird things would usually happen. For example, when I was watching a movie with my father, I could see the lights flickering on and off in the dining room. We didn't have any problems with the electricity, and my mother was also at work at the time. When I was younger, I often saw a dog sitting somewhere in my house that I thought was my own, so I would approach it, However, before I could get within 6 feet, it would vanish, and I would then find my actual dog sitting in the kitchen. I also saw a tall man with a long black trench coat, black boots, and a tall black top hat. He didn't have a face either.
I would usually see him turning the corner, so I, a stupid kid, decided to try and chase him.
And when I turned the corner, he was gone. I stopped seeing him after I turned 6. I sometimes see the dog still, but it disappears after I blink. As I had gotten older, I started to feel like someone was standing over me as I slept. Luckily, I had an eye mask on, so I could open my eyes without seeing whatever was standing over me, but I could just sense it, just staring at me. Eventually I would fall asleep, and the feeling of anxiety would go away. The next morning I would pretend like nothing happened and go along with my day. I never told anyone this until now because I thought that people would think I was crazy. Sometimes when I would watch a scary movie, I would have sleep paralysis, and it would feel like I was being watched by a dark figure. Sometimes it would be at the foot of my bed, or it would be right next to me, watching and staring into my skull. I leave a light on because these feelings make me scared of the dark, as I fear that whatever watched me in my sleep might return. I used to have dreams full of life and color, but now, it's just a black void. I can't talk, move, or hear anything. It's just a pitch black void with nothing in it. I've tried using dream catchers and protection charms and evil eyes, but nothing will work. I'm thinking about getting a priest to come bless my house or an exorcist to get rid of whatever is in my house. My mother told me that I would randomly look up from my toys and speak to something that wasn't there. I never had an imaginary friend, so she thought I was just talking to the birds in the attic, but even when the birds had moved out of our attic, I would still do this. Even as I'm typing this, I feel paranoid, and I feel like someone's watching me. Sometime around 2009 when I was about 12 years old. It was around 11 or so at night, and my mom had left briefly to go pick my older sister up from a high school football game. She told me to stay home and watch my little sister, born in '08. I begged her to let me go, because we had just moved into a new house that had a very creepy, unexplainable vibe. My mom even hated being in the house. But, we were a really low-income family and needed a roof over our heads. So reluctantly, I stayed with my little sister. She was just beginning to walk at the time, so she was basically an infant, which is why I can recall the dates so vividly. I was so scared, so I occupied myself with the Xbox in the front living room area near the front door. There was a wall separating the house from the living room area with a large formal dining room. This formal dining area had a huge mounted shelf on the wall. We had only been living there for about a week or two, so all of my mom's boxes were stored in the dining room. About 10 minutes after mom left, there was a huge crash in the other room. I thought somebody was in the house. I didn't even think about it. I grabbed my sister and ran outside the house behind a large tree. Frantically calling my mom, she thought I was overreacting. I was crying, begging her to come home, barefoot, with my sister on my hip until 12 a.m. When we went back inside, we looked to see that all of the boxes in the dining room had fallen off the large mantel. It is important to note that the mantel was so huge that the boxes were not hanging off. It is clear they were pushed directly off. The mantel was still perfectly intact. We moved houses after that. I had a few different things going on in my old house. The spirit of my cat was there because I would feel her jump on the bed and make biscuits on my pillow or at my feet. Could feel and see the blanket moving, but nothing was there. My husband thought I was just imagining things until he felt it for himself. Another time, I was in bed reading an article on my phone. My husband entered through the bedroom door and walked to the bathroom. Nothing weird about that, until about 30 seconds later when my husband once again entered the bedroom door and lay down in bed next to me. I was very startled, as I just watched him walk into the bathroom. I asked him if he had left the room and quickly returned, to which he replied that he had just come from downstairs. My son, as a baby, would laugh at nothing and would even imitate whispering as though he were having a conversation. It was interesting because he would pause in his laughter and imitation whispering, as though he was listening to someone who was talking back to him. Then, he would squeal with delight and continue the conversation. We also would hear footsteps running up the stairs, I would see shadows moving, and my great-grandmother's photo would float. Lots of activities. Nothing ever hurt us, it was just a lot of activity. They were grandparents or past pets. It was the ones who mimicked us that freaked me out. We would constantly hear our names being called. I told my husband and sons to never, ever respond to this. If you hear someone calling you from another room, do not answer. Walk around the house, find that person you think is calling you, and then talk to them face to face. We had mimic activity until the day we moved. Never hurt us, but never stopped trying even when ignored. When I was a child, my family and I had moved into our small suburban home. It was quiet compared to the bustling city streets we lived on previously. It was a different change of pace, somewhere where my sister and I didn't have to share the same room together. But as I grew older, I started to notice events that were out of the ordinary, something that I could never imagine thinking or seeing. At first, it was the sounds of creaky floors or items dropping, something that you would think would be attributed to objects having a poor placement on a table or the usual "the house is adjusting" argument. But it became repetitive, and it was more apparent that something else is here with us. One day, while I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my sister while our parents were at work, we heard something shuffling around in the living room. We thought nothing of it, thinking that it was our dog. It was that very moment when the two of us peered down the hallway only to see a shadowy full-body silhouette walk from the living room and up the stairs. What made this even worse was that it made no noise whatsoever. Over the years, we encountered other events where we saw this silhouette poke its head around the corners of doorways or windows numerous times. We also hear what sounds like a little girl laugh, as well as her, in a childish voice, saying "wake up," while we are asleep. Footsteps are a more recent occurrence, where I hear footsteps beside my bed some nights only to wake up and no one is there. I was home alone, as at the time I lived with my parents and had the day off while they were at work. I was in my room, chatting on Discord with my friends, listening to music, and having some beer, just generally trying to enjoy a rare day off. It was around 2 p.m., and the day was fully bright outside, with the windows open and the sound of wind chimes in the air. The atmosphere was peaceful, so I wasn't thinking about anything scary or paranormal happening. As I'm about to jump into a game with one of my friends, I hear outside my closed bedroom. Basically a woman sobbing? It wasn't the sound of someone bawling but rather slow, deep, heart-wrenching sobs. My heart dropped because my first thought was my mom was home early from work and that something awful had happened. So I get up and head over to my door, hand on the knob, but I pause. I can't remember whether I got a bad feeling or why I paused, as the event was a while ago, but I just kind of stood there for a minute. In the pause, I realized it didn't sound like my mom at all, or anyone that I knew, really. Even just from the crying, I could tell it was like an unfamiliar voice, I guess? But still, I was, worried, trying to rationalize that it could be my mom, and she was just out there by herself, crying. So I opened my door and stepped out, about to head down the short hall and into the living room, where I thought it was coming from. But as soon as I took the first step out of my room, it just went really silent. It was not completely silent, as I could still hear the wind outside and the wind chimes. But the crying stopped, and something just felt really wrong, like everything went super still within the house. So I went back into my room and locked the door and let my friends know what was happening via Discord. I'm super freaked out now. I texted my mom just to reconfirm that it wasn't her, and she said she was still in a city over at her job. I steeled my nerves after a bit of debating, grabbed a switchblade that I keep in my bag, and wandered out, sort of thinking that someone had broken in now. But after a full sweep of the entire house, as well as closets and cabinets, I didn't find anything. All the doors were locked as well, and the screens on the window were intact, so no break-in. I know it was something paranormal, but that particular instance, hearing someone crying, never happened again. I grew up in a haunted house from ages 5 to 18. Lots of stories. But it was living in a haunted apartment when I was 25-ish that was the most terrifying experience. The place was built in 1905. The apartments had old closets that you could walk inside and see pipes and such exposed inside. There had been a suicide in my apartment a few years before I moved in, and of course I found this out after I had moved out because the place gave me negative vibes. When I first moved in, I always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom. Something made me uncomfortable sleeping in the apartment, and I started locking the bedroom door whenever I went to bed. In my 25 years of life up until then, I had never had such a strong need to have a locked bedroom door when I slept. Something about the closet also bothered me, and I couldn't sleep if the door was open. A few strange things happened/built up. But, one night I woke up in total sleep paralysis, and there was a shadow figure standing over my bed, and the closet door was open. I moved out not long after that. An apartment right above opened up and had a better view and nicer layout. The timing was perfect. The building manager and I were friends. He was doing some renovations in my old apartment. The building owner had been over, and they were standing in my old unit chatting, so I joined in the convo. The owner then brought up that a previous tenant died and ended himself in the closet. My friend gave him a gesture to stop talking, but he was old and just kept talking anyway. I was pissed with my friend for not telling me, but he had only been managing the building a few months before I moved in, and he found out about the suicide after I had moved out of the unit. I legitimately thought I was going crazy. I had been so depressed and frightened while I lived in that apartment. I didn't feel like myself. And after I moved out, I didn't feel depressed and frightened. It was the haunting that was getting to me. The old Wheeler Hotel in Wheeler, Oregon. Took my then girlfriend, now ex-wife, there to propose. She'd looked the place up on the way down to the coast and saw that it was haunted, enough that they've had multiple ghost hunting shows done there. I didn't know any of this. I am also very sensitive to the paranormal and have experiences all the time. My next story will be about my current rental, but this place had history, and I knew none of it when we got there. When we got to our room and opened the door, I immediately saw him sitting on top of the entrance threshold. It had a weird door frame with the frame exposed and some flat storage space high up above the rest of the room, and there he sat, hand on his suitcase, little golfer cap, suspenders. And being that I didn't want to scare my girlfriend, I said nothing. She had her own experience that night, when she awoke to find the same ghost standing at the foot of our bed, just staring and smiling creepily at her. I proposed, she said yes, we went to Denny's for dinner, it was literally the only restaurant open by then lol, and spent one more night, both too scared to sleep but still not telling each other why. It wasn't until we were in the car and pulling away that she began mentioning the ghost stories she'd heard and her experience, and I got to tell her mine. Yes. Lack of communication was inherent in our demise, and that ghost still haunts me as well. When I was in high school, between where I lived and my high school, the fastest way to get to school was to cut across this huge cemetery. If you walked around it, it would add extra minutes to your walk to school, so whether the gates were open or not, I would cut through the cemetery and through the mausoleum, not sure if I spelled that right. The cemetery contained many statues, and when you stood in the center, visibility to the outside was blocked, creating an impression that the ground dipped lower towards the middle. One time my friends and I dared one another to stay the night. We all snuck out of our homes at around 11 or 12 and met behind the mausoleum. I showed up, and 3 other friends all arrived together. We brought flashlights, candles, snacks, and a small radio. We decided that it would be best to stay inside the mausoleum so that our candlelight or flashlights wouldn't attract attention. We dared one another to sit under a statue that was nearby. The statue was a faceless angel weeping. It was slightly larger than life-size scale, and the angel had his head hanging down like he was mourning. Eventually, one friend said, "This is stupid," and left. Shortly after, another friend left because we heard what sounded like an echoing clang from deep inside. In the end, I was the only one to stay the entire night and left before dawn so that my parents wouldn't find out that I was missing. During that time when I was alone, my mind started to play tricks on me. I swore some of the statues were moving, like out of the corner of my eye, a slight movement of the head, a hand moving, or a shadow moving around the statues. I ended up leaving the mausoleum after the last friend left because it seemed far too much inside. I kept hearing noises and something that sounded like a moan, hum, or soft cry. Another time I heard what sounded like a high-pitched animal sound. I sat on a bench in the middle part of the cemetery, but that was the area surrounded by statues. Once in a while a car would drive by that was unseen, but the glow of the lights made all the statues move with shadows. At least I stayed all night, and it was not my last time spending a night in a cemetery. The other time I was drunk and fell asleep in one. My ex and I moved to this old apartment building in SF roughly a decade ago. We lived there a couple of years before noticing there was a small cabinet door between the living room and kitchen. It didn't have a knob and had been painted over so many times it was difficult to pry open, but we tried anyway. It mainly housed gas pipes and some electrical wiring, but there were a few wooden crates stacked in the front section as if it had been used as storage at some point. My boyfriend went digging around in there and found some old-timey girls' clothing and a dirty hand-sewn doll. That instantly gave us the creeps, so he put them back and sealed the door shut. Following that incident, we started hearing something knocking around in there and a voice whispering. Both of our cats would sit and mew by the door as if asking us to open it so they could get at whatever was inside. The craftier one managed to open it one night, and we woke up to loud screeching as if she was in a fight with another cat. After that, both cats started avoiding that walkway in the kitchen. Even we were afraid, and neither of us wanted to be home alone. My friend who is into witchy stuff insisted we disturbed whatever was in there and wanted to have a seance with a Ouija board to communicate with the entity and find out why it was there. My boyfriend and I were opposed to this at first because we didn't want to make things worse like in every movie featuring a spirit board. However, we were all drinking one night with my friend and her boyfriend, and that naturally made us more open to the possibility. Thinking back on it, she most likely planned the whole scenario because she happened to have the board in her car. So we set up some candles, turned off the lights, and my friend went through the process of asking easy questions like what year it was, what their age was, etc. We gathered the spirit, which belonged to a teenage girl who died after climbing into the cabinet during the 1906 earthquake. When my friend asked what the last thing the spirit remembered was, she said her head and tummy hurt. We surmised that the quake damaged the gas pipe, leading to her death from carbon monoxide poisoning. But we never found out for sure because our landlord said he had not owned the building that long and was not aware of anyone dying inside of it. He wouldn't have been surprised if someone had, though, because it had been built before 1906. It was one of the few buildings in the area that survived the earthquake and fire due to having a steel frame. I asked my friend if she could get the ghost to move on, and she laughed and explained she never claimed she could do that. She said most spirits are harmless, and we were lucky it was not a demonic presence. Okay, then. We tried finding a Catholic priest who would do an exorcism, but we found out that is not so easy. Most of them would only do a house blessing after a hefty donation, but that didn't seem to work. We just got used to it being around and continued living there for a few more years. The spirit rarely left the cabinet, especially when we were home, so we just let her be. We assumed she felt safe in there, which might be why she climbed in there in the first place. Sometimes the TV or stereo in the living room would be turned on when we got home, but that was the extent of the haunting. For decades, there have been stories about a ghost seen in the vicinity of the family home, a girl in a white dress that would walk down the street and disappear right around the corner. This story dates back to before the house was built, but my dad always said it originated from neighbors who resented losing the lot as a dump and were trying to scare the family away. He also likes to remind us that when he cleaned out the place and dug the ground up for the foundation, there was nothing but trash. But I'd like to point out that the foundations aren't that deep. The first ones to see her were my cousin and grandma. They saw her ahead of them one morning when they were walking home from the bus stop and thought she'd come in towards the house. But everything was locked, and there was no one. They walked all the way around to try and find her before coming in, and a neighbor confirmed she'd seen someone, too. I first saw her in my room one morning when I was waking up to go to school, just standing there and looking at me, but when I blinked, she was gone. Another time, someone came in to wake me and totally freaked because they saw someone standing in the same place, and they went nuts checking the room, but there was no one. I told them it was okay, it was just the ghost, and my calmness made them freak out even worse, but it really did seem normal to me by then. One Christmas, my baby niece saw the girl when she was looking outside from the living room toward my window and asked if we were going to invite her in. No one else could see her, but the description matched, and how would a 3-year-old from another city know? Years later, when I moved away, I think she came with me. I never saw anything, but my housemate commented there was this vibe, the same vibe that used to be in my old room, which used to scare my best friend so much that she never visited if she could help it. So, I made up a story about what might have happened to this girl, why she was a ghost, and why she would latch on to me, of all the people who'd lived there, and decided to do something about it. That year, on the Day of the Dead, besides the family altar in the living room, I made a tiny one in my room, all in white, a white candle, white flowers, a white figurine of a praying angel, some water, and salt, in the corner where I'd seen her before. I lit her candle and dedicated a prayer. To my knowledge, no one's seen her since, but I still remember her, still keep the Day of the Dead as my favorite holiday, and still make a point of saying a prayer for lost souls. Because maybe, just maybe, it can help them rest a little easier. I used to work seasonally in a large cemetery, parts of it being ancient. This is the East Coast close to RT-40, so Revolutionary War era graves and older are not uncommon. Also in the mountains, so the cemetery has a very hilly landscape. The most expensive and notable graves are on the higher elevations. I was planting flowers by myself on a mounded area called Hawking Hill during a late spring afternoon. I was surrounded by large headstones of the wealthy, primarily of the late Victorian and early Edwardian eras, that are arranged in a circular pattern on said hill with a large monument in the center. You can see the top of the mound pretty easily through the stones, as they are spaced well. Rich people like to have space for bushes and such when interred back in those days. Anyhow, I was kneeling on the grass doing my work when a woman's voice within what seemed like 10 feet or less whispered, "Hello. What were you doing?" I stood up immediately because it surprised the shit out of me. Looked around for a person. Nobody is to be found anywhere near. Now, I would have taken it as a figment of my imagination, but I said hello? Pretty damn loud after, and it responded as a whisper once again, saying, "Hello." I took my gardening equipment and got the duck out of there. Although nothing like that ever happened again, I was extremely frightened. Lol. I heard a man saying help me in the yard in the middle of the night. For some background information, my mom told me this story. We are in Oregon, and where we live specifically is surrounded by trees and wildlife. We have a decent-sized yard, 2.5 acres or so, I think. This is not the first time strange sounds and things have happened in this area, but I have never heard a real voice and words before. We have been living here for around 11 years, and this has never happened. This was around 2 weeks ago. It was dark outside. My mom was taking the dogs out for the last time before bed. A little bit further down our driveway, like 10 to 15 steps, there is a shed, and a few feet beyond that is a fence that leads into our neighbor's property. It just looks like a forest. She said at this time she had one earbud in and she was listening to an audiobook. She thought she heard a man's voice, but her brain hadn't registered it, and the dogs didn't react. She heard it a second time, a few seconds later, and she said she thought she heard it say, "Help me." She took her earbud out and focused, and she heard it clear as day, "Help me." The worst thing about this is she described the voice as perfectly calm and level, not raising its voice, with no urgency in its tone. When she repeated what she heard, her voice was flat. She calls out to it, "Hello? Are you okay?" etc., flashing her light back in the trees, yet she sees nothing. After a few seconds she hears something big crashing through the woods. This is when the dogs finally reacted and began barking. She said it didn't sound like a bipedal creature and seemed too large to be a human. This is when she went back inside. I remember she immediately came into my room. I was watching a video on TV, and asked, "Did the video you're watching say, 'Help me,' at any point?" I felt confused and somewhat annoyed, so I responded, "No." She then went and got my dad, and they both went out again to look closer. Thankfully my mom didn't walk closer when she was alone, but I know she did call out, which isn't good. Apparently it looked like the neighbor's house that was beyond the fence was without power, if that's relevant. Personally, last year one and my boyfriend heard a sound in the same area, beyond that fence, farther from the shed, when it was getting dark outside. It sounded somewhat like a gasp. Like when you breathe in when you're choking on something. It didn't sound human, though. It repeated multiple times and began to get closer as branches snapped towards us. We booked it out of there. Again, like my mom, I didn't see anything. We both spent a while after looking up all the animal sounds and calls it could have been, and nothing came even close to matching. I have no idea what my mom heard. A fair distance away we have some odd neighbors that are known for stealing people's stuff, screaming loudly at each other at night, being in and out of prison, etc. That's my mom's most rational explanation. However, that may be worse than something paranormal/inhuman. However, these people have never been up our driveway to our house specifically, and my mom didn't see anything. Our property is no stranger to these things, although stuff has calmed down a fair amount compared to years ago. I had completely forgotten about it all, and I no longer believed in the paranormal at all anymore. Me, my mom, and my dad still don't know what to think. When she told me the story, I remember my heart sinking, my stomach twisting. I was immediately filled with dread. My mom got goosebumps retelling it. She had spent a good few days deciding if she even should tell me. Thankfully, my mom doesn't go outside alone anymore after dark and pays full attention. Thank you for listening. I bought an antique Chesterfield chair a few years ago. When fixing it up, I found a little horn. I don't know the English word, but steer and guard? Like you put below candles in a candlestick so they won't drip? It had been shoved into a hole in the armrest, as if a bored child had put it there. I started getting really weird vibes from where that chair sat. Like something huge and bad hung in that corner, occasionally coming into the adjacent bedroom at night to loom over us. I would get up then and imagine I had an invisible shield of sorts and slowly force it back to that spot until it disappeared, but it would be back a few nights later. I sold the chair to a bar owner, and the feeling slowly lessened, but that corner of my house still feels off years later. I kept the candle guard because I thought it was cute. Kids will be kids no matter the century. But I often have OBEs at night where I interact with a small shadow figure, and they started when I bought that chair, and I occasionally have stuff disappear and reappear in the same spot weeks later. It's not all that much, but maybe, just maybe, I happen to thrift not one but two ghosts. I grew up in a house that was not particularly old. It was from the late 80s or early 90s, with sand-colored brick with beige aluminum soffits and weird wooden ornament things sticking out of the roof ridge where it meets the gable end in every section. It is a very odd and specific design. Standard deep suburbia cookie-cutter house from the period that you find all over the Australian capital cities. Anyone who has spent time in an Australian suburb has likely seen one just like it. It didn't really have the history you'd expect a haunted house to have. There was no murder in it or anything either. The old owners, I believe, had built the house, decided to move, and then sold it. Anyway, so something incredibly angry lived in one of the upstairs bedrooms. For most of my school years I would come home 30 or more minutes before anyone else did, because we all went to different schools, so I'd have some time in the house every afternoon, just me and it. It would often stomp around when nobody else was home. It would also run back and forth along the upstairs hallway. It was so solid sounding that I'd often wonder if somebody had broken in while I was at school. Once or twice I would see wardrobe doors shake. This scared me so much as a young child that I would sit on the downstairs couch and blare the TV on full volume until my sisters got home so I didn't have to hear anything. I was less avoidant as an adult, and in turn the activity seemed to die down as the years dragged on, perhaps because I had started ignoring it. I suppose, for an entity that thrives on fear, a solitary 10-year-old child presents an easy target. And when they grow up, less so. That's kind of how I made sense of it anyway. The entire suburb used to be farmland, and there was some kind of barn thing back in the day, which stood in a position that overlapped the part of the current day house that was active. I noticed a distinct line in the house indicating where the activity was concentrated, and I was surprised to see on Google Maps from the 1930s that this area closely matched the location of the barn that had existed there previously. It was concentrated in that part of the house, and largely the upper floor, not sure why. That upstairs section of the house comprised a bedroom and a bathroom. As an adult, I brought 2 separate friends over on 2 different occasions who have some level of mediumship ability and gave them a house tour when my parents were out of town. They both reacted to the upstairs bedroom. The less sensitive friend refused to enter the bedroom, while the more sensitive friend sat with me inside and described the spirit as a sleazy man with a mean streak and no respect for boundaries. It wasn't my bedroom as a kid, but when I moved back home at the start of the pandemic, I lived in that room because it was the biggest, side note, moment of appreciation to my parents for letting me back after I'd flown the nest. I didn't notice as much activity when I returned as a grown-up, except for one night when there were shadow people crawling around my bed on all fours and darting around the place. I had never seen anything like that before, and I have not experienced anything similar since. As a result, I drove to a friend's house and stayed there for the night. Apart from that one incident, everything happened when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I lived in terror in that house and hated being in it alone, because activity would kick up. Whatever it was probably fed off of these feelings. Very little activity happened around other family members, although they did occasionally cop some of it but didn't believe it was anything paranormal. As a grown-up, I was less scared of it, but I still did get freaked out enough one night to basically flee the property for the evening. I also remember when I'd go for my walks, when I would leave and come back, there was a strong sensation of being watched from the windows of that same bedroom. My house is built over ancient burial grounds. When they were digging for the foundations, they found ancient bones scattered about and ancient funerary items. Yet besides that, I remember one of my strange experiences very well. Several years back, around 9 to 10 p.m., I was alone in my bedroom, changing my shirt. My bedroom door was left slightly open. As I was changing, from the side of my eye, I could see my bedroom door very gradually opening. From the side of my eye, I saw a person's head very slowly peeking through. I immediately turned to look, and I see the face of a woman, which I've never seen before. Her face was fully pale white, her hair was a midnight black, and she was rather tall and willowy. The moment I locked eyes with her, in just a moment, she immediately pulled her head back. I rushed toward my bedroom door, yet once there, I found no one standing there, looked through the hallway leading to my bedroom, and it was completely empty. I walked through, which led to a living hall. Some of my family members were sitting there talking and watching TV. I asked them, "Did any of you see someone pass through the hallway?" They looked at me strangely and replied, "No." Then I asked, "Did anyone open my bedroom door by any chance?" And they responded, "No." Why? Did something happen? Here I just stood there and tried my best to brush it off. In another instance, not far from this occurrence, once I was asleep in my bedroom at night, I felt the bed shaking, a common occurrence, which I tend to try my best to ignore. However, during that specific night, I felt a really sharp, excruciating pain on my shoulder that lasted for several seconds. During the morning time, I touched my shoulder, but the pain was gone, and I thought to myself that that was a really strange dream. After a light breakfast, I wanted to take a shower. Once I was in my bathroom, I took my shirt off, and in the large bathroom mirror, I noticed something peculiar on one of my shoulders. I crept closer to the mirror and saw a very large purple/bluish bruise on my shoulder. And upon closer inspection, I could see the imprint of teeth, and I quickly realized that this is a bite mark. I then realized that this bite mark was the source of the excruciating pain I had felt while sleeping the previous night. The strange thing is that I sleep alone in my bedroom, and the door is always locked. This is definitely a paranormal experience, but it wasn't scary, it was actually beautiful. When I was 6, I lost my parents in a car accident. My grandmother then took me in as my guardian, and she was absolutely amazing to me. She was widowed, so it was just me and her living in her house. After about 3 months we both started experiencing things around the house. We could smell things like perfume or incense, the table lamp where my grandmother read books would randomly switch on, and her stair lift would activate on its own. We both talked about it but ignored it. Anyway, 4 months, to the day, after my parents passed away, I woke up and went downstairs to find my grandmother in her chair, having passed during the night. That night, I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting on my bed. I could literally feel the bed compress like someone was sitting there, and I heard, "I'm with them, they're proud of you." The spot where the bed was compressed was exactly where my grandmother sat to wake me up with tea and biscuits following my parents' deaths. I still live in the house, and I still experience things regularly. I've had two. My house was built in 1900, and the basement is insanely creepy. Peeling paint, spider webs, a crawl space, and a creepy corridor, the whole works. One night it was eerily still, and I was standing in my kitchen. I suddenly heard a great foom sound that scared the hell out of me. It came from the basement. I went down the creaky steps, and lo and behold, the wooden cover for the crawl space was ejected a good foot away from where it was supposed to be. Against my better gut instincts, I stuck my head in and shined a light around, nothing but cobwebs. Weird. The next one is even weirder to me. I've lived alone in my house for a few years now. I've also had a spare TV in my room for my entire tenure here, but have always had to manually walk and turn on/off the TV because I couldn't find the remote. I wasn't even sure I had it because I had never used it in the past. It was simply just a habit to do so. I mainly just used the TV to watch videos before I fell asleep and was able to control the volume through my phone. Well, one day I decided I'd finally look for the damn thing. I have a spare room that just contains plastic tubs and totes of books and other crap. I have no reason to ever go in there unless I'm on a specific mission to find something. Well, one day I finally had enough of walking back and forth from the TV and decided I was going to look for that remote in one of those boxes. So I walk over to the spare bedroom, and I was stunned to see nothing else but the remote lying on top of the plastic box I thought it was in. This stunned me for a couple reasons. Number 1, how the hell did I not remember finding it after being convinced I threw it away long ago? Also, it made no sense for me to lay it out in the open instead of putting it in my bedroom, which was right next door to the spare room. I had been looking for it for years without knowing it existed, and wham, there it is. Still makes no sense to me, and it's a bit too mundane for me to share with friends or family. Big old WTF from me. Please share any experiences or stories you've had. I grew up in a house that was built in the 60s. It was the house that my great-grandfather lived in when he passed away. Side note, he and I were fairly close, as I was the first great-grandchild in my family, and he was a super kind, amazing person. We moved out for a period but moved back in when my parents divorced. I never had one singular odd or scary experience in the entire time I lived there, with the exception of one night. When we lived there the second time, I was in my late teens. I slept with my door cracked since my cat liked to come and go. One night I was woken up by what I thought was my door slamming open. I turned quickly in the dark and saw that the door was still cracked shut, and then almost immediately saw a huge black shadow coming at me from across the room. I sat completely still in my bed for what had to be 45 minutes. After that time I was practically begging Alexa to turn on the lights but kept getting the "I'm having trouble connecting to the internet" message. After what felt like 2 hours of sitting completely still, the lights came on and I was all alone. I wholeheartedly believe in paranormal activity, but that's the only experience I've had that comes close to scary. Haunted home, real story. So, I'm about 101% sure our house is haunted and decided to share with you guys the story. We have a big house in the countryside, where I got my big girl room when I was about 6. I used to be terrified and have nightmares all the time. Another issue was that the light bulbs were frequently faulty. They either provided insufficient light, leaving the room dark, or burned out very often. My dad even brought a guy out to check the wiring, but there seemed to have been no problem. But I hated sleeping there. It got to the point where I refused to stay there, and my dad put my bed in the hallway. Even then, I remember staring at that door, completely unsettled for no specific reasons. I would like to add here that I was and to this day am not the type of person that gets scared of the dark or anything else easily. I usually face challenges head on, and even as a child, I was not afraid of the dark. A few years go by, and the door to this room stays closed, mainly, as we don't have much, if any, use for it. My family no longer stays upstairs on that floor, we all move our things to the first floor and only have to go upstairs on occasion if there's something we need from there. At this point I'm 13-14. Still firmly scared of that one specific room. I feel like when I step in there, someone is standing behind me, really close, almost touching, staring at my face from over my shoulder. But I brush it off as some childhood trauma and don't say a thing. Then, one day, our priest stumbles and goes pale when he gets to blessing this specific room. This was the very first time this house got blessed. So this kind of raises my eyebrow a bit more. About a year later, Dad was diagnosed with cancer, and his grandfather's clock, which had been functioning for decades, suddenly stopped working for no apparent reason and could not be repaired. We got a new one, within a day it stopped working. Changed batteries, and the clock started working, but it was going backwards. This made my dad really upset for some reason. He took out the batteries and put both of the clocks in the cabinet. My dad passed on, and my mom takes out the same newer clock, puts in some batteries, it works perfectly. Out of curiosity, she removes the old grandfather clock and replaces the batteries, which also functions flawlessly. One thing to mention, my dad had a friend who had some serious mental issues. At his funeral, held at the said country home, and we had a priest and my nun grandmother reading prayers, this friend approached my mom and asked her to please not think he's crazy, but he saw a demon jump out of our balcony and run away. He described it as really tall and entirely black, like covered by shadows. My mother recounts this story a few months later while we are visiting the house with my aunt, my father's sister. This motivated me to bring up my experiences as a kid with the room, along with seeing something or someone really tall in a cloak standing on top of a hill our house looked out on. The figure, staring directly at me, seemed to elevate its head arrogantly and straighten its posture upon seeing me. It is important to emphasize how tall that figure appeared, especially since the hill is quite far away, making it look significantly large, at least around 3 meters tall. My experience in that room led to my aunt confessing that she used to have nightmares while sleeping there as a child, and she often felt watched, which prompted her to change rooms. This led to the information spreading and other family members saying they felt unsettled in the home, like they were being watched and needed to get out. One family relative said she felt someone over her shoulder. She got creeped out but brushed it off as thinking maybe it was my dad's spirit visiting his childhood home. These stories deeply unsettled everyone, including my mom, so we didn't visit that house as often anymore. But rare visits turned to none when my sister, our cousin, and my mom took my dad's beloved music system out to the balcony to play some songs, and it started playing gospel music. It was not connected to the radio or Bluetooth, there was no CD inside, and the system physically couldn't remember songs, it could only play music through a CD, a flash drive, the radio, or Bluetooth. My mom says she pressed next multiple times, but every time it was a morning gospel song. They got so terrified they left the thing on the balcony and drove away. My grandfather had to go there and take it back into the house. Another part of this family lore is the story of my great-grandmother, who, along with her husband, built this house on this land. Apparently, she kept having miscarriages or birthing stillborn babies to the point where she went to a shaman/witch, I don't know the name in English, who told her to buy a newborn baby's weight in meat and bury it in the backyard every time she got pregnant. She did that and had 3 healthy pregnancies and babies, my grandfather and his brother and sister. When I was younger, I was a delinquent, and we would go around looking for abandoned houses so we could see what we could make money from. Most of the time it was metal from the pipes in the house. We would go in there and gut the house. We'd be able to each make 40, enough for some food and beer or weed. The last time I did this, we were in a house, and we were looking for whatever we thought had money. The house was 3 floors, and I was on the main floor. I was looking through the bathroom, and some of us went upstairs and to the basement. I came out of the bathroom, and I heard everyone in the house, the people walking upstairs, and someone cutting metal in the basement. It seemed normal. So I went to go help downstairs since I was one of the strongest ones, and will be able to get out of there faster. When I walked to the stairway doorway to go downstairs, I got a weird feeling like something was telling me not to go downstairs, and I felt pressure in my chest. It felt like someone was yelling at me to turn around, but I didn't hear anything, just the feeling of being admonished. This all happened between 5 and 7 seconds. After it stopped, I stopped hearing anyone in the house, no stomping, nothing, it was silent. I look out the bay window, and all my friends are across the street. I run out of the house and meet with them, asking them what they're doing, and they say they saw me run out of the house, and they thought I ran home because I was scared of getting in trouble. I heard them in the house when they were outside, and they saw me run out of the house, and something stopped me from going in the basement. Unexplained childhood incident. When I was around 3 to 4, I woke up in the middle of the night and wanted my mom really bad. I got out of bed, but the house was completely dark, and I was afraid to walk to my mom's room. I tried to wake my sister up and ask her to walk with me, but she wouldn't wake up. So, I tried to peek around my doorframe and muster up the courage to walk to my mom's room. We lived in a single wide trailer at the time, so I should have been able to see my mom's door from my room, but it was so dark I couldn't. I finally decided to tiptoe slowly down the hallway. When I got about halfway down, this sense of calm washed over me. All my fear disappeared, and I felt safe. I didn't realize this at the time, but looking back as an adult, that is exactly what happened. As I walked into the living room, there were these two dim green glowing figures on our couch. They had no features at all and were almost like mannequins, but blurry on the edges. I wasn't scared of them, I felt no fear at all. I felt this sense of safety and almost like I had known them my whole life. They started to motion me to them, and as I walked towards them, I realized the one on the left had my car seat in its lap. I remember the right one putting me in the car seat, but I don't remember ever feeling it touch me. Once I was in the car seat, the one on the left just rocked me back and forth until I fell asleep. My mother was playing with my hair and calling my name when I woke up in the morning. When I woke up, she helped me out of my car seat and just looked at me shocked. She said, "Chris, how in the world did you get your car seat on the couch and then get in it?" I tried to tell her what had happened, and she just gave me a hug and dropped it. I later overheard her talking to my dad and saying, "The car seat was in the car. It was in the car. How did it get in the house and on the couch, and how did he get in it?" My dad kept telling her she must have forgotten that she brought it in and just sat it on the couch. She got more and more upset that he was dismissing her. The last thing I heard was the bed squeak like she sat on it, and crying, she said, "But he was buckled in." Who buckled him in? My mom and I didn't talk about it for years and years. I was in my mid-20s when I brought it up the next time. She was dumbfounded that I remembered that night and remembered it so well. She just said she didn't know what happened and it had bothered her for years. She became paranoid that someone was in the house and was trying to kidnap me but was interrupted by something. So, I explained it again and how safe I felt during all of this, but she just hugged me and said, "I'm glad you were okay and that nothing happened to you. I've only told a couple of people about this in my life. I've always had this fear of judgment or disbelief, and it makes me sound like the weird guy. So, I've only told the people I trust the most in my life. It bothers me still to this day because I want to know what those things were and how all of this is even possible, or if I imagine the green people and somehow got in my car seat and buckled it. I don't know how to explain what they were, but if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this, I would be extremely grateful if you'd share your experience with me. I can't be the only person this has ever happened to, right?" The whistling entity. I am a service tech who gets into a lot of homes, businesses, and abandoned warehouses. 20 years ago I had a work order for a local residence to service their water softener. I entered the home, met the missus, and headed for the basement, where the equipment was located. As I worked, I could hear the mister working in his woodshop a few doors away. He was cheery. I could tell from his pleasant tune that he whistled over and over. I finished up after about 25 minutes and wrote up the billing invoice, and at that I walked over to the woodshop to explain it to him. When I approached the door to the shop, all noises stopped. I peeked my head inside to find the room empty and dark. The saws and equipment were neatly stowed with little evidence that they had been used recently. Could have sworn, but must have gone upstairs when I was working. So, I proceeded to deliver the slip upstairs to the missus. I mentioned to her that I was going to explain the repair to her hubby, but he left his shop before I could see him. It was at this point that nearly all color drained from her face and distress obviously appeared. I kept hearing the tune that he whistled in my head and blew a few phrases out so she could hear. She began to tear up and told me that her husband had passed away suddenly a few weeks back. The tune I whistled was so familiar to her, as he had whistled it over many years, but especially when he was woodworking in his shop. As I left, I couldn't help thinking about how that spirit must be watching over his living wife, and I wasn't fearful. Nice, huh? That school is pure hell. I am Surinamese, and many of us here believe strongly in spirituality, that there is much more between heaven and earth than we can see or explain. St. Louis School. As the mother of a daughter who also attended that school, I can assure you, something is not right. My daughter experienced things as well. As far as I know, she has never been gifted or sensitive to the paranormal. She never saw spirits or strange things before. But after she started attending St. Louis, I noticed her slowly change from a cheerful child into a nervous and fearful one. At first, I thought it was just in my head, but it became clearer when she started having frequent nightmares. Almost every week, I had to rush to her room to comfort her. I didn't know then what was happening at the school until one day she told me she constantly saw figures. At random times, she would see strange, even terrifying, shapes wandering around the school grounds. She said she could feel that these entities knew she saw them, and when they noticed, they would linger around her longer. It felt threatening, like they were not good beings. Occasionally, she even felt as if they were trying to get inside of her. One day, while in class, she suddenly screamed and panicked because she felt something fighting to enter her. The teacher and students were shocked, but she was the most terrified. I was called at work and told to pick her up. They didn't explain much, only that she had been screaming and acting strangely. When she came home, she wasn't herself. She spoke in strange words that were not her own. Her eyes rolled unnaturally, as if something else had taken over. I held her hands, praying and begging for her safety, but then, suddenly, she struck me across the face. Not a normal child slap, but with a force far too strong for her age, as if from an adult. She glared at me with rage and growled like an aggressive dog, saying, "Never call on your God again. He will not help you." I was horrified. That was not my daughter speaking. Something else was inside her. I was too afraid to keep holding her, so I called two of my sisters, both from the church. They came and prayed over her with me. It took hours of praying before she began to return to herself. Afterwards, she cried uncontrollably, completely shaken. She was confused, not even sure where she was or what had happened. My sisters comforted her and gave her a small Bible and a rosary, telling her to keep them under her pillow and pray whenever she felt afraid. Then my daughter opened up about what she had been experiencing at school. She especially saw horrifying figures in the bathroom area. Occasionally they appeared as nuns, but half-rotted, telling her terrible things and urging her to do things she would rather not do. The doors would slam shut on their own or creak open while she was inside. She heard constant footsteps, running, and faucets turning on by themselves. At times, she even heard crowds of voices in the restroom, as if it was full of people, but when she checked, there was no one. On more than one occasion, she was choked until she nearly lost consciousness in the restroom. She had never told me before, fearing I wouldn't believe her. That was why she became so quiet and withdrawn. She stopped using the restroom at school altogether, holding it in all day, which caused frequent bladder infections. Only later did I understand the reason. I eventually removed her from the school and explained to the administration why. Even if I don't write my name here, they will know which parent I am. So when some people try to deny that such things happen at that school, I cannot understand it. These experiences are real. And it's about the safety of children. Not everyone can see what my daughter saw, but those entities targeted her relentlessly. She even said the nuns wanted her to lure other children into the restroom, and because she refused, they tormented her. Some children who are sensitive feel immediately that the restroom is unsafe, and they avoid it. That was precisely what my daughter felt. And those things were drawn to children like her. Even after removing her from that school, she is still traumatized. She fears being alone, and she cannot use the restroom comfortably even in her new school. I had to get her psychological help. The fear runs deep, and what happened has scarred her. Thank you for listening this far. In the dead of night a year after my grandfather died, and after we moved my grandma out of the home they shared to a smaller one, I woke up in my bedroom. Like eyes snapped open, and when I looked to my right, I saw my grandfather standing there. It freaked me out, but I tried for as long as I could not to blink because I just knew he'd be gone. I wasn't going to say anything about it. The next morning I'm making coffee, and my mom comes downstairs from her room. We had a normal morning chat, and then she said, "I think my dad came to me last night." That was confirmation I was not seeing things. I believe my grandfather was coming to say goodbye because we would no longer be returning to the old house where all the family gatherings took place. I have only seen him one time again after that, and that was almost 10 years ago. With my grandmother's passing this year, I have a sense that I may not see him again. But who knows? Went on a trip with friends to a cabin neither of us has been to before. It was a friend of mine's family friend's cabin. The cabin seemed chill. No spooky feelings outside of being in the woods in Michigan. I had a good day, went to bed, and woke up again in the middle of the night. But this time it was different. I felt as if I were sitting on top of the tall dresser across from the bed, looking down at myself sleeping and my friend on the top bunk above me. To the left of me, it was dark, fully blacked out. Slowly the darkness morphed into what I would now call, after seeing other people talk about this, the shadow man. He was tall and blacked out, but all I could make out was a tall hat and shoulders that went straight down. It was very scary and very creepy, and I just kept telling myself, do not turn around. Unlike my granddad. I would rather not see that. The next morning friends asked, how did y'all sleep? The friend I shared the room with said, oh good, and then my other friend, Dom, proceeded to go into detail about how she was reading. The room she was in was down the hall, and the closet of that room shared a wall with the room another friend was in. This is important. She said she was reading, with the side table light on, and everything was fine until the corner of the room where the closet was got really dark. She said it was pitch black and felt very ominous. The third friend, Sibel, said she kept hearing knocks coming from the wall to her left, the wall she shared with the closet in Dom's room. She said it wouldn't happen consistently. But it happened often enough to disrupt her sleep. Dom said that when the black shadow wouldn't go away, she got under the covers and went, whoever you are, you're not welcome here. Go away. She said it wasn't long before it was gone. I told her what happened to me. I think whatever was there left her room and came to mine. We all slept together in the living room the next day. I currently live in a 100-year-old home in Detroit. I have seen an older gentleman in my basement. He gives grumpy vibes, not evil or malicious. But he does not like people in his space. After seeing him a couple of times, I told him that I would respect him as long as he respects me. We've been chill for 5 years. But I have seen him and heard him speaking in the basement, and sometimes coming up the stairs from the basement, I'll hear 2 footsteps, my own and someone else's. Nearly a year after moving it to my home, my neighbor across the street told me about an older man named Michael that died in the basement. There is also a little girl in my house. I've seen her twice. She's mischievous like kids are. She's moved things have gone missing, and I've heard her running down the hall. I think she likes my bedroom because she's hanging in there sometimes. Once I heard a child singing while I was lying in bed, and then something came up beside my bed and was touching my leg before wrapping a hand around my ankle. I snapped my leg back so fast and went, "You're not allowed to touch me." I have never been touched since. But she still tests my patience and limits with her noises and mischief. The third ghost in my house is for sure residual. It's a woman who walks the same path in the living room. I think Michael was in the house originally, basement. The little girl and the woman. I am not sure if the little girl and the woman were in the house originally or if I brought them with my antiques. My sister said I need to stop antiquing, but I haven't and probably won't. But there was a time, around the time at the cabin, where I kept seeing people and having shared experiences with friends enough for me to believe that ghosts are real. I want to see more and explore more. But also low-key scared to come across something I'd regret coming across. My old house was haunted. I lived in my old house from the age of 6 to 14, and it was very old, barely anything worked, but I loved it because I had my own bedroom and a bathroom, which was actually just a half bath with a sink and toilet. I love paranormal topics and am sensitive to them, so I sensed something was off about our house. However, I ignored it because it didn't seem to affect me. Little things would happen, though, like a cup falling, a weird pressure on my chest, and sometimes just a feeling of being watched, but it wasn't until I turned 14 that my dad told me something he and my uncle had learned from the landlord when we moved in. It turns out the previous renter had ended herself in the downstairs bathroom in the shower. Now I was shocked at first, but then those little things that happened, like a cup falling off the counter even though there was no wind and it wasn't on the edge, made sense now. Unfortunately, after learning about the death of the girl, she started to aggressively attack me. Every time I take a shower, I hang a towel over the shower rod to wipe my eyes of water, and whenever I took a shower after learning of this ghost's death, I would feel this heavy sense of dread that if I turned around, something terrible would happen. The towel I would hang up started to resemble feet hanging in the shadows. Needless to say, I suffered from this ghost's aggression, and soon it escalated to the point where I actually feared for my life. When we moved into this house, my bedroom had no door, so I would leave the bathroom light on so I could see if anything was in the hallway. Well, while there was no door, there were door hinges, and they were stuck firmly to the door frame. Nothing could get them to move. I was in my bed with my friend as she was spending the night, and we were both on our phones when my cat started to act weird, jumping around and chirping in my room. I initially thought it was a fly and ignored it until I remembered that all the windows were closed and that the downstairs door, which leads to the upstairs where my room is, should prevent any bugs from getting through. My friend pointed to the doorframe and asked me if I saw what she saw. Looking over to the doorframe, I saw the hinges moving on their own. They were not moving rapidly but very slowly and deliberately, like flipping the page of a book. I said, "Duck that," and dove under my covers while my friend laughed, convinced it was a prank, but then she screamed and dove under the covers with me. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, and when we got back up, everything was normal. To this day, My friend refuses to explain what caused her to scream, and fortunately, we moved out of that house shortly afterward to my current home, which is either ghost-free or inhabited by friendly ghosts. Why is something messing with me and my so? A little over a month ago, I and my fiancé were heading to his house. We live 2 hours away from each other. I was driving. The GPS took us a different direction than usual. I like using the GPS even when I know how to get there because I get distracted easily, except for my work commute. Anyways, it took us a new way. We'd been having a very good conversation about getting engaged soon, and then he'd fallen asleep. As soon as we turned, I felt off, like bad off. I believe I'm sensitive to the paranormal, probably because I've been medically dead, but this wasn't my usual feeling of something being around me, nor was it my attachment that's hung around since I was young. My so woke up, and he felt really off, and he told me before I even said anything. The road was an unlit gravel country road with trees surrounding it. It's never taken us that way again, but things were tense. After we got off the road, I slowly felt better, but things were still off, and my so temporarily omitted details that I'll share at the time he shared them in the story. So we talked about it and decided at the time that it had to have been my attachment coming back, or us being anxious or something, but we didn't really believe that. A week later exactly, I'm driving home after dropping him off when our call drops and all the electrical systems in my car cut out. The call reconnects, and all the systems turn back on within a second, and I mean every single light and everything, and then it goes back to normal. I'd been feeling weird, but I assume it was anxiety from the last week. Immediately after that, he noticed my attachment for the first time. He'd felt it, and I'd been feeling it the entire week again, and I'd given a general description of what I saw, but he described it in detail. Despite everything, life continues, my childhood fear of the dark has returned, and strange occurrences happen occasionally. However, I believe it's all just anxiety. One day, while we were driving together and discussing this, he shared a bizarre dream he had in the mall that mirrored the exact scene where he had fallen asleep. In his dream, something was watching us, a tall, lanky creature that charged at him and screamed in his face as soon as he noticed it. He finally admits that he saw something on that road. It's a cliché horror trope, a young girl or woman in a white dress with sleeves that are off the shoulder and long wavy black hair. He said that every time we turned a corner she was closer, sometimes switching sides until eventually she appeared right in front of the car. He said that I hit her and passed through her, and then out of the corner of his eye he saw her slumped over in the back seat as though dead. I didn't know this at the time, but every single time I looked over to check on him, he asked me to look forward and pay attention to the road and not him, and it was because he was afraid I'd notice her and she'd move or something. However, I hadn't mentioned to him that since the night the car power went out, I felt paranoid every time I drove in the dark. I would glance into the rearview mirror and observe someone seated in the back seat, again assuming it was a manifestation of anxiety. Anyways, we started realizing there might be a serious problem and began looking into it. Fast forward to last night. We were watching Midnight Gospel and lying on the couch, house sitting for my parents. He starts to feel anxious, assuming it is because the show discusses death and he worries about losing me. However, after I fall asleep on the couch, he wakes up to see a figure watching him from the kitchen while we are both sleeping in the living room. In my dream, I go to the kitchen to get him water, but for some inexplicable reason, I suddenly sprint back to the living room, which is unusual for me. He mentioned that it felt as if something was about to sprint at him. He said he felt like he kept peeking around the corner to see if he was awake. Eventually the feeling went away, and he fell asleep. When we woke up, I told him my dream first thing because it felt so damn weird, and he told me his experience. I decided to share this story with people, hoping for guidance, advice, collaboration, or reassurance that I'm sane. I have zero clue what to do, and that scares me. There are 2 nights that my dad and I will never forget. We still talk about it every now and then, some 20 years later. This happened when I was about 10 years old. It had always been known that the family who lived in my childhood home before us had a daughter who had passed away from cancer at a very young age. She did not pass away in the house but in a local hospital. I had always gotten weird vibes in the house, but only in the basement. I grew up in the house from age 3 to 18. My basement had a little makeshift basketball court in it, and I would shoot hoops nightly down there. We had a huge, black stereo that I would listen to music on while shooting hoops. Whenever I finished shooting hoops, I would invariably rush up the basement stairs and deliberately avoid looking into this specific corner, as I constantly experienced the sensation of being watched by something or someone. You know, that particular sensation. To such an extent that I had convinced myself that if I were to glance into that corner while ascending the stairs, I would see someone standing there. One night after shooting hoops, I went upstairs and got in bed to get ready for sleep. My dad and I lay down at the same exact time, in separate rooms, though. I can't make this story up. Within minutes of lying down, my dad came knocking on my door and told me that I forgot to turn the stereo off. I literally had no idea what he was talking about because I certainly did. He said, "The stereo is absolutely blaring." He went down to the basement, and the stereo was blaring in the pitch dark. This story gets even wilder. About a week later, maybe not even, I got done shooting hoops again and lay in bed. As I lay in bed, I started hearing what sounded like bouncing. I could hear the noise coming through the vent in the corner of my room. I put my ear up to the vent, and all of a sudden I understood what I was hearing and froze. My basketball was dribbling. I ran into my dad's room. He put his ear up to the vent and heard the exact same thing. He went downstairs to the basement, and this time, it was still and quiet. No sound. No dribbling. Just darkness. That vent in the corner of my room was directly over the corner of the basement that I had always had super weird vibes about. To this day, my dad and I will joke about it every now and then. This occurred approximately 20 years ago, but it remains an experience neither of us will ever forget. Permanently etched in our memories and minds, that's for sure. I had always wanted to share this story I experienced in my youth, and I thought this would be the perfect place to do so. Thanks for listening. I lived in a house that was crazy haunted. Whatever was there started off as threatening. Setting off motion sensors, moving stuff around in front of you, a very strong feeling of being watched, and at one point I was in bed for the night, and I could hear someone breathing. Honest to God, someone was breathing in my room besides me. Held my breath in the pitch dark and could hear it clearly. I remember saying something along the lines of "I have a math test tomorrow, and I don't think I can do it. If you're going to hurt me, please just make it quick." Then a whole lot of bad stuff happened with my family in that house, law involvement, etc., and then whatever was hanging out in my house changed. Instead of throwing stuff, it had just moved stuff from place to place gently. I stopped feeling like I was being watched all the time. If I were walking towards a room over 20 feet away, so no wind gusts, the door would slowly swing open, and once I was in the room, it would just as slowly close the door. I said, "Thank you" when it did that. The paramedics' most recent paranormal encounter. This is the most recent paranormal encounter I personally have had as a paramedic in the Rocky Mountain region. I don't really want to disclose what state specifically, but throughout my career, I, 26 male, have had multiple encounters since joining EMS at the age of 18. Before that, I had never actually seen anything unusual. I had only heard strange whispers and similar sounds in houses but had not witnessed anything myself. The time this happened was literally a day before American Thanksgiving. This detail is relevant to the story. It's been a long shift of really standard calls, fender benders, someone slipped on ice, or someone has frostbite from exposure, nothing too crazy, and my partner, a 25F, and I get a call over the radio dispatching us to a retirement community for a non-emergent welfare check. We load up, we go, and we meet fire and PD outside the residence. Now, to kind of paint the picture of these places, they're more million-dollar condos than what you'd think of as a retirement community with multiple floors. More on this in a second. We go and make contact with the old lady who is home. We'll call her Susan. Opens the door and tells us that she thinks her roommate, whom we will call Mary, is very ill. Mary is very ill. She hasn't come out of her room for about 5 days, not even to use the bathroom or to eat or bathe, but Susan assures us that Mary is there. Susan opened her door and saw Mary in bed, and she moves every now and then in between her checking on her. The first questions I ask are for all the pertinent information regarding health, any signs of declining health, or prior issues that had led to her not moving or being unable to move. The bottom line is that apart from being old, she should be in great health. So after about 5 minutes of information gathering and getting the info and gear we might need off our ambulance, I decide I'm going to go up there and attempt to make contact with Mary and see if I can get her talking to me. So I make my way up these stairs. It's like 5 stairs, a landing, a pivot, and 5 more stairs, and there's a landing up top with a banister overlooking where my partner and fire and PD are hanging out with Susan. I remember looking down the hallway. Despite the lights being on, it still felt oddly dark and cold. At that moment, I realized I had never asked which room was Mary's, so I called down, and Susan yelled back that her room was the last one on the right. I ended up having to walk all the way down this hallway past several open and dark doors, and by this time it was getting uneasy to the point I just wanted to turn back and wait for my partner or one of the fire guys to come up with me. So after making it to the door, I knocked and said, "Hey Mary, this is Kay. I'm with EMS, we got called to come check on you. Is it okay if I come in?" Now this always on welfare check always gets some sort of response, but not this time. There was no response from the other side of the door, but I did hear what sounded like someone getting out of bed and walking to what I thought was the middle of the room. This next part happened in the span of seconds, but I will be explaining it from memory with as much detail as possible, so I try again, but this time I've decided that I'm going in, so I repeat myself but add that I'm coming in to make sure she's okay. I grab the doorknob and open the door, scanning from right to left. Initially, I don't see anything, but as I continue scanning, I reach the middle of the room and see what appears to be a figure resembling an older lady standing there. Defining features, it felt like it was facing me, but it was just a shadow, and as my eyes met it, my fight or flight response kicked in, and I slammed the door shut, turned away, and took a step to walk away, but I heard the door open behind me, and I took off. For context, I'm about 6'2" and 245. I sprinted down the hallway, hearing nothing behind me except for the door reopening, which terrified me. I then jumped over the guardrail onto the stairs, landed on them, lost my footing, and rolled down the remaining stairs, finally stopping at the feet of a group engaged in conversation. Before I could get up, everyone was saying, "What the hell?" and asking what was wrong with me. I sat up, nearly hysterical but not crying, and explained what I saw and what happened afterward, insisting that I would not go back up there because there was no Mary in that room. In the midst of this, we heard footsteps moving away from the landing upstairs. One of the cops went up there and announced, "This is the police, if someone's up there, you need to come out." He proceeded upstairs, and as soon as he reached the top landing, we all heard the door slam shut before he came back down. He, my partner, and the firefighters all go upstairs, do a full search of the condo, and find no one and nothing. I finally get it together after sitting with Susan in the living room, and I go upstairs with the others, and the entire atmosphere has changed. It's no longer dark, the open doorways don't seem like empty black holes, and Mary's room isn't the same, it's lively and not the same room I peered into. All in all, we found nothing and had no patience to take it anywhere. While we were clearing the scene and getting our equipment back in the ambulance, this car pulled up. It's got a family of 3 and a little old lady in it. The little old lady in the car was Mary. 5 days prior, Mary's family had come to pick her up for Thanksgiving, and she had left a note for Susan that fell off the fridge, indicating she would return to celebrate with them a day or two before, so Susan should prepare for that. I saw something in that room, and I truly believe I did, but I also wonder if I tricked myself into placing an object there to justify the terror I felt at that moment. What I know for certain is that my partner, the police officer, a few firefighters, and I all heard footsteps and the door slam. When I asked the officer if he saw anything while he was upstairs, he consistently either said he didn't want to think about it or denied it happened altogether. Either way, this is again one of the many happenings I've personally encountered in my time in EMS. Because unusual events were the norm for us, this was the only occasion that caused me to react with fear. Several decades ago, we were having a holiday dinner at my mom's house, which we referred to as the Enchanted House due to all the activity. As it got late, she and I were the only ones left in the dining room of the old house, with candlelight, seated next to each other. We were discussing personal things, and she had her hand placed over mine. Suddenly, her hand became old and noticeably wrinkled, as if another hand was masking hers. I looked up, and the same thing happened to her face, and frightened, I quickly jerked my hand away. She asked what happened, I explained, and she convinced me that someone was trying to show me something and that we should go back to what we were doing so I could describe it better. We did so, and I described every detail of the mask over her face. It was an elderly woman with dark hair and a cropped hairstyle. My mom had long hair pulled back, so that alone was very different. The face was rounder and much older, and this went on for at least 5 minutes. Despite being initially jarred by the sight of the elderly hand and stranger's face, I then got a very kind, comforting feeling. My mother finally explained she had seen that same face over hers one night in the mirror, in dim lighting, and figured it was a guardian angel, guide, or the previous owner, who regularly interacted with us, although unseen. I later saw an episode of a ghost series, possibly My Ghost Story or Ghostly Encounters, where a family at a holiday gathering all experienced this same phenomenon of seeing what looked like masks over everyone else's faces. A few years ago, I also read about something similar in either Journey of Souls or Destiny of Souls, where a guide used masking as a teaching tool. It only happened that once and is something I found very interesting. At times, I've wondered how many others have experienced something similar. Paranormal encounter with a ghost boy on Christmas Eve. My mom and stepdad got married when I was 4. Mom and I moved into the house my stepdad owned after they got married. It was just the 3 of us and our animals. I'm an only child, and at the time of the story, we had 2 big dogs who lived inside/outside. The dogs usually roamed outside at night on the 20 acres we owned. We lived in that house for 14 years, and I saw my fair share of creepy stuff. But this story sticks out the most. A little background. I was around 7, I don't exactly remember the age, only the present I got that year. I know I was old enough to use the bathroom at night alone, but still young enough that my mom usually checked on me to make sure I got back in bed okay. I also know for sure it was Christmas Eve. Our tree was always off at night except for Christmas Eve. Our house was small. 850 square feet is small. But I loved it. When you walked in the front door, you were immediately in the living room. Straight ahead was the hall. In reality, it was a small rectangle that had doors on 3 of the 4 sides. From the living room/front door, you could see into the bathroom. Heading to the bathroom, you have a closet on the left, the bathroom door, my bedroom door to the right, an empty wall the width of a door, and my parents' bedroom door. The kitchen was off to the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom/closet. Super cute, just cozy. We also had an unfinished basement with the stairs in the living room by the kitchen/door to the back porch. Okay. Story time. I got up to use the bathroom Christmas Eve. I got up from my bed, went out my bedroom door, and turned the corner into the bathroom. I, of course, had to peek at the tree and the presents underneath. I thought I saw a monster truck. At the time I was a big fan and really wanted a remote control one, but I didn't stop to look because I really had to go. After I finished up my business, I got up and looked towards the living room. I really wanted to peek at my presents before I went back to sleep. We didn't close the door in my house growing up unless we had people over, so I could see the front door and the glow of the tree from my seat. I looked back at the toilet to flush, and when I looked back up at the doorway between the hall and living room, I saw the silhouette of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I'm not sure what his face looked like. He was standing in the doorway using his left hand to hold the doorframe so he could lean into the living room on his tiptoes and peek at the presents. In his right hand he had a red sucker. His whole body was dark because of the lack of light and the Christmas lights shining behind him. I shuffled to the edge of the bathroom so I was just inside the doorway. If I had put my arm straight out, I could have touched this kid. I'm standing there, about to ask him what he's doing, when he slowly drops back down to his flat feet and starts to turn and face me. As he starts to turn, I get the most intense feeling of dread, fear, and anxiety. I can see the profile of his face, and he's just smiling, staring straight ahead. Just as he's about to get all the way around, my mom walks out of her room and asks me if I'm okay. In the split second it took to look at her and back at the boy, he was gone. I instantly felt better, and it was as if he never existed. I pointed to the living room, and my mom assumed I was trying to peek at presents, so she just tucked me back into bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly and woke up and totally forgot about it the next morning. I did get my remote control monster truck that year. It was years before it came back to me, and I told my mom about it. She wasn't surprised because, like I said, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house. House from hell. So this is my experience living in a very active house about 5 years ago. There were many creepy occurrences there. Just after graduation my family moved into a house previously owned by my great-grandmother. There were 5 of us at first, my parents and I, my friend Kay, and my boyfriend, now husband, who had moved in due to not wanting to move out of state with his family. The house had an odd layout, as it had been a mobile home that had an add-on in the front, living room, and the back, master bedroom. BF had a room on one end of the house, Kay and I shared a room on the other end, and the kitchen was in the middle. To get to the main bathroom, you would have to go through the room that Kay and I shared. It started with little things and weird feelings, moved objects, and the sound of furniture being dragged and moved, most notably the bathroom door. We started keeping it shut at night, otherwise, it would open and close on its own. It did this all the time, day or night. We checked for drafts and anything that could cause it and found nothing. We began to notice that any time it started to move, if we got irritated and told it to stop, the door would immediately cease to move. One night we hadn't been in bed long when Kay got up to use the bathroom. I heard her leave the bathroom without closing the door, and I told her to close it because it bothered me. I heard the long creak of the door as it slowly shut but didn't quite click into place. I irritably told her to shut it all the way when she responded, "That wasn't me," in a horrified tone from the opposite corner of the room. I turned the light on, and the door was completely shut, just not clicked into the frame. I ripped the door open, and nothing was there. We were completely freaked out. I slammed the door and told her that is why I keep the door shut. There was also the knocking. We had 3 doors on the house leading outside. Pretty frequently, we would hear 3 knocks on any door. I always look out the window before opening the door if we're not expecting any guests because you never know who might be there, so I would check the window, and nobody would be there. I was once standing in front of the back door when this happened, and I could clearly see through the window on the door that nobody was there, but the door was shaking as it was hit. My BF started having vivid nightmares of something trying to drag him from his bed. Later my mother's friend was over with her toddler, and he was exploring like a normal kid his age. He stopped in the doorway to my boyfriend's room and stared for a while. He then came back and started saying ghost and pointing at my BF's room. Nobody had mentioned anything remotely related to a ghost or scary story, and this was nowhere near Halloween either. We tried to brush it off, but he was insistent. We tried to ask for details, but he would only say go see and ghost. I followed him back to the room, and he pointed at the small game closet and insisted, ghost. Go see. I opened the door for him, and nothing was there, but he insisted there was a ghost. The worst night we spent in the house was when we had been in bed for about 45 minutes when suddenly something slammed into the bed with enough force to shake the whole mattress. My bed frame didn't fit in the small room, so the mattress was on the box spring on the floor. Both Kay and I felt it. We turned the light on, and there was nothing, so we got as far from the edges of the bed as possible and tried to sleep. Something grabbed Kay's foot and yanked her blanket away. Once again the light revealed nothing, and we were terrified. Something slammed into the wall next to the other side of the bed. These things continued into the night, and we ended up sleeping in the living room with my dad staying with us. My parents eventually moved out after a few months into the house they were working on and left us the hell house. Kay and I moved into the master room and made our old room the area where we kept our 2 new puppies' kennels. On 3 occasions, my 8-month-old pup would walk into that room, throw himself on the floor with all of his hair standing on end, and scream and growl while fixated on the upper corner of the room. When he did this, I would have to physically drag him from the room and shut the door to calm him. The other dog would somehow get out of a locked kennel when he was left in there alone, and the kennel would still be locked and secure. We still have no idea how he did it. Kay and my mother started hearing voices when they were there alone, and the uncomfortable feeling got worse. One night something started clawing at our bedroom door, and we were so freaked out by it that I called my BF to come look at the door from the other side because I was too scared to unlock and open it. The house got 5 feet of water in it during Hurricane Harvey, and we tore it down and moved. I never felt upset over losing the house. I was just relieved to be rid of it and hoped that the flood took whatever was there with it. One of the houses I grew up in was very haunted. All my family experienced stuff, but it mainly happened to me for some reason. The spookiest thing that happened was one night I was lying in bed reading and listening to music on the stereo across the room. It was around 11 p.m. All the lights were off except for my bedside lamp, and everyone was asleep on the second floor. My room was the only one in the basement. Suddenly my music just turned off, and I heard a loud bang. I sat in my bed and asked who was there and if they were okay, thinking maybe my mother or someone came down into my room and fell. A woman's voice answered, "I'm just an old lady." I turned around and saw, a flat, white silhouette standing there just behind me, and after a few seconds, it quickly moved back into the wall. Then the music turned back on. I freaked out and ran around the house turning on all the lights I could find. When I told this to my parents, they admitted they had found an old funeral urn in the basement, probably belonging to the former owners, but they didn't want to scare me because I was so happy to have my room there. Train yard ghost? This event concerns my husband, who works for the railway and does lots of night shifts. As you can imagine, many stories fly around the different yards about railway ghosts, legends, and such like. Normally he laughs them off, but on this night and at this particular location, which is situated deep in the middle of the Derbyshire Peak District, he found little to laugh about. It happened in August this year on a hot, soundless night, as where this yard is situated means that it is surrounded by open fields and hills, and so no traffic, etc., can be heard, especially in the middle of the night. He had finished handling one train, he is a shunter, by the way, and was in the cabin waiting for his next train, which was due about half an hour later. The cabin is really just an old wooden shack with a little office and a kitchen area with an old chair and cooker. In fact, the yard is so old that the old semaphore signal system is still in operation, and I find the whole place spooky even in daylight. Anyway, this night, a Tuesday, if I remember, there was a full moon in the sky. Known for reasons that shall become clear later, my husband was sitting on the chair waiting for the kettle to boil to make a cup of tea. He was sitting in the dark, enjoying the peace and quiet. Suddenly he distinctly heard footsteps on the gravel in the yard outside. He could hear someone, or something, moving towards the cabin and the cracking sounds of the leaves and twigs as it grew closer. He is the only member of staff on duty at night, save for the drivers who arrive and depart with each train, so he knew that he was completely alone. The footsteps grew louder but seemed to be of a dragging nature, as he could hear one foot being dragged behind the other. As I said, this place is so remote, up a long dark lane, that no one from the nearby village bothers to go up there. It is private property after all, and so it is desolate at night. Normally my husband would go out and confront whoever it was, as at other yards there have been cases of opportunists stealing from the standing trains, and he has had to call the police many times before. But for some reason the sound of these footsteps filled him with foreboding. There is a small window at the side of the cabin, and if you are sitting in the chair, you look directly at it. My husband could see the bright light of the full moon outside, and suddenly he saw illuminated by it, as if leaning against the window, a dark inverted V shape, i.e., an arm bent at the elbow as if somebody was stooping and holding onto their back as they walked. It was also very knobbly, like a twiglet is how Sean described it. He could also hear a deep rasping sound like somebody breathing with a bad lung problem. The elbow moved around the building away from the window, and as my husband looked at the door, he realized that it wasn't locked. Instead of jumping up to lock it as he might have done, he felt compelled to sit still, and so he sat stunned as a sharp tapping could be heard on the door itself. Suddenly the doorknob turned about 3 times, but not enough to open it. At this point, my husband was terrified and anticipating an unknown presence to enter the cabin, but just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned on its heel and vanished. The dragging sound and rasping disappeared, but not gradually, just all of a sudden. He went out to investigate but found, as he expected, that he was alone again. He told me this story with some reluctance. As I said, he is a real skeptic. Incidentally, he regularly sees one particular driver and has to get into the cabin for part of the journey down the line to this yard. Anyway, this particular driver insists on keeping the doors locked, even though he knows that they never see anyone around there. My husband asked him why he kept them firmly bolted, but all he said in reply was whether Sean had heard or seen anything strange while he had been working at this particular yard. Sean pretended not to understand what the driver meant, hoping he would provide more information. However, the driver simply shrugged and locked the door again. He has thankfully seen or heard nothing untoward since, but now he goes on nights in that particular yard with some trepidation. We were house hunting last year and spotted a really great townhome with the works. Great long driveway, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, 3 big living spaces, a big garage, and a decent enough backyard. We haven't seen something like this in our price range, and in a hot housing market, we knew we had to get in. We arrive at the place, obviously very excited. I remember it being a warm, sunny Sunday afternoon, peak viewing times. First red flag, not a single person was waiting to view it. Usually on Sundays, there were lineups out the door. Nobody was waiting outside. Heck, even when we left, no one came by. We went inside and got hit with reality. The place was very worn down. The carpet was sunken, the walls were yellowed and sticky. Yeah, I know, the backyard was not taken care of. The cabinets were so old that the drawers were just wood against wood, no rolling mechanism, the doors were janky, all upstairs floors were filthy and needed replacing. It was just overall a massive disappointment. Something the pictures didn't capture. I couldn't help but feel an overarching sense of dread the entire time I was in there. Of course, I chalked it up to just thinking about the tens of thousands of renovations the place needs. But the feeling never left. We went to leave and sat in the car to debrief. As we are talking, I just get this intense wave of pure loss. I remember physically feeling a numbness, my hearing was slightly muffled, and I felt almost like a weird head buzz. For the record, I have never gone through the experience of losing a loved one before. But this intense and dulling feeling, as if I lost a child, I don't have kids, was overwhelming. So, I tell my boyfriend, I am so sorry, but I feel like crying right now, and I don't know why. Then I cry the most confusing cry I've ever cried. I am in a very, very happy place in my life and have nothing to be depressed or sad about. So imagine your brain feeling completely normal and happy, but my chest physically felt like I was going to die of heartbreak and sadness. I don't know how else to describe it. I look over to my boyfriend, who never cries and always keeps his composure. He told me he felt the same exact feeling, and it was very reminiscent of how he felt when his grandfather died, semi-recently. It was a very intense feeling, and, I repeat, we had no reason to be feeling this way. We decide to finally leave and go to the grocery store to get some food as a pick-me-up. We sat in the car for 30 minutes, and not a single person dropped by for a viewing in that time, which is highly unusual. We reached the grocery store, and that's when the numbness and the muffling set in. I'm walking, and I feel numb. I lifted my toque, beanie for the non-Canadians, just in case it was blocking my ears, and nope, it wasn't. I guess the best way to describe it is, imagine your biggest and toughest heartbreak, whether it was losing your partner or your family member. Just pure soul-crushing heartbreak. Imagine how numbing the feeling is after crying all the tears you could possibly cry and just building that wall of numbness where nothing can touch you. Just felt like pure depression. That's how we both felt in the store. It felt like we weren't really even there. As we got our things and left, the further and further we got away from that house, the feeling started to lift. Even when we got home, we felt little remnants of it. It wasn't until the next day the feeling was gone. I've never ever felt that in my life before or ever again. I don't know what was going on / what went on in the house, but I think it's safe to say that whatever it was, it did not want us to be there. My paranormal experiences. I've had a few experiences over the years. The most terrifying ones were in this house I lived in from the age of about 9/10 until I was 16. I shared a room with my older sister at the time. It was quite a large room. We both had single beds. Mine was directly opposite the bedroom door on the left side of the room, and hers was on the opposite side of the room but facing the same direction. One night, I was woken up in the middle of the night by something physically poking me behind my left ear twice. I always slept on my right side, and saying, "Hello, hello." I woke up all bleary-eyed and looked at the end of my bed to see a figure standing there. I hid under the covers, absolutely terrified, for maybe about 20 to 30 seconds and eventually mustered up the courage to take another look. I pulled back the covers to then see the figure had moved and was now standing at the end of my sister's bed. At that point I hid back under the covers, and I think I just passed out from fear. I could still feel the pressure behind my ear from where I had been poked when I woke up in the morning. After that experience I was not able to sleep with my ear out of the covers until I was nearly an adult, even for a couple years after I moved out of that house, because I was so scared it would happen again. I didn't tell anyone at the time, but I told my sister a few years ago, and she admitted to me that she had also woken up once in that room to see someone standing over me. There were a couple more experiences in that house. Another one was the first night my mom ever left me alone in the house. This was after my siblings had moved out and gone to university. I was upstairs in my room when all of a sudden I heard my dog, who rarely barked, start barking downstairs. I came out of my room and looked down the stairs to see the front door wide open, and my dog just stood there barking at it. I go down to close it and take a look outside to see no one even close by and no one had come in the house. Apparently the woman who lived in that house previous to us had died there, and I imagine our bedroom was likely where she passed. 2. I've had a few more experiences in recent years and in different houses. Shortly after my dad's mom, passed away 3 years ago, I woke up one night for seemingly no reason. I only ever wake up in the middle of the night if I need the toilet or if someone physically wakes me, and this was a house I rented with a friend. I opened my eyes and saw someone standing there. It didn't scare me, and I shut my eyes, not thinking much of it, and then thought to myself, hang on, and opened my eyes again, and they were still there. I blinked, and they were still there, so I turned my lamp on, and then they vanished. I'm sure it was my gran. I wasn't scared at all, and the figure was her height and build. I was also woken up around the same time by someone gently touching my hand. Again, I'm sure it was her. My gran and I were so close. She passed during COVID, from cancer, and 2 days before her funeral, I caught COVID and wasn't allowed to attend, which was horrible. I wrote something for the funeral celebrant to read on my behalf and had to watch on live stream. I felt so guilty I couldn't be there even though it was out of my control, and I think those experiences were just her letting me see her one last time and telling me it was okay. I have dreamed of her once since then. I am certain she continues to watch over me, just as she did when she was alive. Also after my mom's mom, died around 6 months after my gran, I went to go stay at my mom's one night. This was a few days after she brought some of her ashes home, and the living room light flickered when I walked in the room. This had also happened when my brother had gone round one night for my mother, and it only ever happened since her ashes were brought home. I also saw a dog toy move completely by itself the same night the light flickered. Again, I'm sure it was my nan just letting us know she was there and she was okay. I miss both of my grandmothers very much. The Arden Road Horror. This past summer I had the misfortune of having to perform pool service work at the H-shaped house that overlooks Arden Road in Denville, New Jersey. After relaying my experiences about this place to a friend, she asked me to share here. It's an overcast day in late June, 2019. My coworker and I arrive at the Arden Road house before 1 p.m. The home is not typical for this area in that it's built in a faux Spanish mission/hacienda style you see a lot in Florida. It looked faded and a bit dirty, as though a dingy shadow were permanently cast on the exterior. The interior of the house was cast in the same dirty shadow, but no lights were on. The property is teeming with activity, though. Contractors, landscapers, and plumbers are hard at work getting the house ready for the new tenants to move in. Immediately there was a sense of hostility emanating from all around. Some of the contractors stared us down, others wouldn't make eye contact at all. No one was smiling or laughing. In fact, they spoke barely audibly to one another. Right off the bat we were on edge and felt like we had to keep an eye on our tools, but we had a long day ahead of us, so we headed to the pool. It was an in-ground pool with a side spa that had been sitting full and fetid for a few years, covered only by a child safety net, not an actual pool cover. It was as green and full of leaves as could be. We began by hauling a 2 and 3 horsepower pump the 400 feet to the pool, followed by the intake hoses, discharge hoses, and then the power washer. It was my job to attach the hoses and find a spot to discharge the water out of the pool. The property's backyard ends in woods, a rock wall, and these small stone mounds, about 5 of them. As I approached the mounds, I got a bad feeling in my stomach. They felt like they had been much bigger at one time but had been deliberately scattered. I got the feeling I was on desecrated ground, and pumping water there was a really bad idea. I opted to put the hose in a small creek bed instead. As we began to drain the water, the new owner arrived and helped us throughout the entire dirty and exhausting job. Every pump we had, both gas-powered and a small electric one for the spa, failed. The electrical outlets on the exterior and even interior of the house we used would fail. One gas pump would finally start to work, then the other would die. The drain process should have taken no more than 25 to 35 minutes. It ended up taking hours. When it was finally time to power wash the pool, the drawstring on the power washer broke, and we had to tie string around the starting mechanism to get it going. The power washer, too, would intermittently die or not perform normally. The homeowner threw his hands up in the air at one point and said, "What the hell is going on with your equipment?" I told him half-jokingly that his new home is built on an Indian burial ground and he should take a look at the scattered rock mounds in the back. He gave me a look of total dismissal and mild annoyance. At one point I had to get something out of the truck when a gentle giant of a plumber approached me and asked if I had any small pieces of PVC to spare. I gave him some and told him of the problems we were having. He went from joking and affable to dead serious when he said, "Brother, I've been here for 2 days now, and I don't want to ever come back here. Something isn't right here, and everything is going wrong for us too. One goddamn thing after another, shit breaking left and right." Unequivocally this was the hardest, most taxing, backbreaking, and longest day of work I have ever had to endure. My coworker said as much, and he has been in this industry since he was 15. The frustration with the failing equipment was the worst part. It was like the place was cursed, because the pumps and power washer were top of the line and months old. We didn't leave until after 8 p.m. and were reamed out for costing our boss money and lost time. It was miserable. The owner thanked us and tipped us well and sent us on our way. On our way home we talked about how many things went so wrong that day for no good reason. Now it is late July, and the homeowner and his family have moved in. They have left for vacation, though, and want their pool clean for when they come back. I and a different coworker show up around 1. It's just us on the scene this time, no one else is around. The weather was identical to the first visit, overcast and muggy. As we wheel our vacuum cart past the house, we both stop dead in our tracks. My hair's raised, and I felt like we were not being watched but being leered at by the most sinister force I have ever felt. Imagine a psychotic murderer in a supermax prison, menacing any guard that passes by their cell. My coworker, let's call him Ryan, quickly piped up, "Do you feel that, bro?" I said I absolutely did. Ryan was an extremely polite, well-mannered, and intelligent young man but suffered from bad anxiety on a daily basis. Within minutes of arriving on the property, he was barely able to function. Whatever was inside this house was getting inside and on top of Ryan's mind. He would try to start setting equipment up, then freeze and just stare into the house. There were genuine tears in his eyes 15 minutes later. He was terrified, and it was no mystery as to why. I was getting angrier and angrier by the minute. Not at Ryan, but whatever malicious entity was toying with us. We began to see shadows flutter and job about inside the house. At one point we heard a muted but audible thud inside, only to see the chandelier in the main room ever so slightly swaying/spinning, as if it were just ever so slightly tapped by a hand. We pushed on, and I had Ryan vacuuming the pool, with his back turned to the house. I tested the water and did my other tasks, intermittently stopping to take pics of the house in hopes of capturing anything. However, I was unsuccessful in capturing any images of the house. Ryan was always very methodical and efficient when he cleaned a pool. He was a bit of a perfectionist. This day he looked at me with a countenance I have only seen in the pictures of Holocaust survivors and whimpered, "Can we please get out of here as soon as possible?" I could barely recognize him. We did what we had to do and then rushed cleaning up and putting things away. I was walking to our truck, past the side of the house that has basement windows. These windows were screened, and the basement was close to pitch black with only very little sun coming in for light, but amidst the darkness a figure so much more black and solid than anything else clearly stood out. It was a human form, but it was crouching on the balls of its feet, swaying and bouncing up and down just a little bit. I stopped several times and made sure it wasn't my reflection or an optical illusion. Anytime I moved, this thing would change positions, like jumping to another window to track/follow me. It was evident to me it was playing a game of the "I'm over here, now I'm over there" type. It finally stood up at one point and waved at me. As dark as it was, I could tell it was giving me a smile made of pure evil and hatred. I finally lost it and yelled, "WTF do you want from us? This isn't your house anymore, get over it." It didn't stop. On the walk back to the pool from my truck to collect more equipment, it did the same thing but with more intensity. This time its movements were faster and more menacing. It made it known that it was faster than any person. The entity was described as being a Rumpelstiltskin creature that came down a chimney and laughed in the caretaker's face, albeit in his dream that felt more real than real. That's not a bad description of what I experienced, a malicious, deformed, humanoid figure that lives to toy with people. We finally packed everything up and got the hell out of there. It is an experience I will never forget, but for some reason I would like to go back and confront it again. Some of my earliest memories involve intense encounters with shadow people, but nothing was as blatant, in your face, and outright demonic as this encounter. Thanks for listening and your input. Oh, and since you made it this far, the actual address is 19 Arden Road, Denville, New Jersey. Check out how many previous owners it has had over the years, often changing hands in a matter of months. I grew up in a home that was haunted and filled with paranormal activity. The house was built in 1922, but I am unsure of all its past history. When I was little, I often had these dreams where I would wander through my house in the nighttime, trying to find something or perhaps someone. The dream would always end when I found the tall dark figure, nothing but a silhouette standing in the middle of my kitchen, exposed by the overhead light over the kitchen sink that hadn't even worked for years before. It was always on in that dream, though. I would wake up sometimes hearing these voices, not angry or of any emotion, but usually just 2 to 3 voices talking mid-sentence in audible English words that were distinguishable but didn't really make much sense. Occasionally I would even wake up frozen, like I couldn't breathe or move but simply lay there with my eyes wide open for a few seconds while still hearing the voices speak briefly. My mother has always experienced things, as has my older sister, my mom hearing a jingle/eerie hymn coming from the back of the refrigerator, or maybe the pantry? Late at night sometimes. Things would turn on or off. The year was 2001. I was just 8 years old. One night my mother woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She was frozen in her steps in the hall when greeted by a deep, hollow, and loud voice right in front of her, that of a man saying slowly and forced out, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." She opened the lights, looked around, and saw nothing. It was a snowy night when she took a look outside. No fresh footprints were seen around the home. She woke my dad up to go investigate the voice, but my dad didn't believe in ghosts or anything of the sort. He came into my room and grabbed my wooden baseball bat, and it woke me up. I worried for my dad and what was happening and wanted to go downstairs. I hadn't heard the voice in the hall, I just stayed awake and listened but eventually fell back asleep. I only learned about this story later in life when I finally understood why my dad came in to get my bat. My dad found nothing out of the ordinary. My mom's father had passed away the previous year of a heart attack, and my dad's mother was suffering and dying of cancer at this time. My mom seems to think that the message was in reference to those events. Throughout the years, my mom and sister experienced various occurrences, including lights turning on and off and occasionally an eerie jingle coming from the kitchen at night. Fast forward to 2018, my parents are divorced, and the house has been vacant for 2 years now, just to be heated during winter months. Tired of living in an apartment, my wife and I decided to rent a house from my father. On the first night after moving in and unpacking, I immediately felt a strong presence that made me feel unwelcome and as if I were being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling as my wife was working overnights at the coffee shop and I was alone. The next day is when it started to all happen again. I got up for my morning shift at 4:30 and was brushing my teeth just in the other room. My wife woke up to a voice that said Earl. She asked me if I had said it, and I in fact didn't. I was brushing my teeth at the time. I thought to myself, here we go again, but I didn't tell her that. The next morning my wife was wide awake watching Netflix on her phone. When 4:15 comes around, I snooze the phone. Shortly thereafter, We hear this peculiar jingle or hymn at the foot of the bed for approximately 8 to 10 seconds. It was long enough for her to shake me and say my name, and I still heard it. It reminded me of Take Me Out to the Ball Game from one of those little teddy bears or something. So terrified, we both threw the lights on and searched the room. There were nothing but boxes of clothes in our room and nothing that could have possibly made that sound. We got the house blessed the next day, and we hadn't experienced anything too far out after that. Occasionally a light would work by itself, or the stove range fan would turn on by itself. It didn't work when we tried it. There was also another time where I and my wife were both standing right next to each other, and I was getting a phone call from her cell, but she was using her phone, and it didn't even show she was calling me. I was too afraid to pick up, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I did pick up. Later on, we bought a home, and my sister moved in. One night, she experienced a disembodied voice at the end of her bed that was whistling the tune to the TV show she had just finished watching. She had also taken videos and seen several orbs just floating around. I just asked her the other day if she's experienced anything lately, and she says that she doesn't anymore. She and her boyfriend are in a good and happy place in life currently, and she seems to think that could be why she isn't experiencing weird things anymore. She also told me she thought that the house was some sort of portal where many spirits would come through. I'm not sure what to think or believe, but after I and my wife both heard that it definitely must be something. Have you ever experienced any of these events? What do they all mean? I am new to this group and wanted to share my experience growing up in my haunted house. Firstly, I would like to clarify that the house we grew up in was actually a double-wide trailer situated on a 10-acre plot in a remote area of New Mexico, not a traditional house. It ran off solar power and well water. The reason I feel this is important is so you guys can understand the layout and the fact that the closest neighbor we had was over 4 miles away. We never had anyone come down our driveway unless we knew they were coming. This house, my family and I believe, sits on a vortex. Now, I acknowledge that this initially sounds implausible and reminiscent of typical ghost stories, but it remains the sole explanation for the occurrence of these events. The very first paranormal experience I remember happening was when I was 8 or 9. Growing up in the country, I frequently found myself alone in the house. I was scared of the laundry room and my parents' room, so I stayed in my room on the left side of the trailer or the living room in the middle. They were so frightening that, to this day, whenever I visit my stepfather, I remain too fearful to enter either of those rooms. They just have bad vibes. I was definitely home alone, as my mom was down the property collecting leaves to add to the garden and my stepdad was in his shop working on a bike, when I heard the sound of boots. Now, my stepdad always wore steel-toed boots or cowboy boots, and I had gotten pretty good at telling which shoes he wore, so I knew these were his work boots. Figuring he wanted me to help him, I left my room only to see no one was in the house. Creeped out, I proceeded to hurry outside to ask my stepdad what he wanted, only to find out he didn't come inside. 2 nights later, I was woken up by the sound of someone walking on the porch in the middle of the night. It was so vivid that I ran down the hall, past the kitchen, into my parents' room to wake them. My stepdad went into the living room to listen, and he heard footsteps, that sounded like boots, on the porch. He grabbed his gun and ran outside only to be met with the night. This continued almost every day around 6 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. for 2 months, until one day it stopped and never happened again. A few months later, my mom became pregnant with my little brother. And this is where things really started happening. As we began collecting toys for my brother's arrival and other baby stuff, we noticed something weird. There would always be a stuffed animal in the center of the room in the morning. Each time, a different animal appeared, and occasionally I would be blamed since I was still a kid. However, when it happened while I was spending the night at my friend's house, the blame shifted to our cat for jumping into the toy bin and knocking the toys onto the floor. When we closed the lid and it continued to happen, we decided to ignore it and just put the toy away each morning. This happened consistently for a few months then. Stopped one day. We feared mice because we sometimes heard rustling in the can bag. My stepdad kept the cans of beer or Coke my family drank in a Walmart bag on the china cabinet hook until it was full, then he took it to recycle when he went to work in ABQ. We never once caught anything in a trap, and when the toys stopped, the rustling in the can bag stopped. Then, one day when my mom was still pregnant with my brother, she got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. Their bathroom was the very last part of the house as an ensuite with 2 large double doors. You could see the kitchen and living room from the bathroom. When she got to the foot of the bed to turn to enter the bathroom, she saw a man sitting on the couch. She can still describe the man to this day. Tall, curly blonde hair, a blue plaid work shirt, blue jeans, and work boots. She remembers gasping and reaching for her housecoat to cover her nightgown and waking my stepdad in the process. By the time he got up, the man was gone. Now, almost 16 years later, she and he both think it might have been my stepdad's grandfather, who my little brother is named after but died nearly 10 years before he was born. Or, my stepdad's father, whom he never met but saw pictures of and also looks very similar. I don't remember anything large happening after that, paranormal-wise anyway, but after my brother was born the activity in the house was extreme. We would see shadows moving in and around the house, the energy in the house was bad. And I don't mean it was a little spooky, it was so scary you would feel it in your stomach. It felt like there was an angry man that lived in my parents' room and laundry room. I would hear noises on the roof as if someone were walking. The light in the bathroom near my room would frequently turn on in the middle of the night, and objects that should not fall over would often do so. This all continued on and off until he was 3 or 4. There would be times when the house would just feel dark and heavy. I would be freaked out being home alone, then. Sometimes the house felt empty, and other times it felt like someone was there, but not necessarily bad. Small things would happen often, like the sink turning on by itself or the return of the boots walking through the house at night. But the biggest thing I remember was my brother's toys. He had this little RC car that was orange. It was meant for toddlers, so it had 2 buttons on the remote and was really slow. It was also really loud when it moved. One day during my brother's nap, we heard the car moving. We all assumed he was awake and faking taking a nap as the car rounded the corner of the hallway into the living room. It went past the door, to the entertainment system, and then stopped. My mom went to put my brother back to bed only to find him asleep and the remote without batteries. This car would constantly drive by or turn on. Then, my grandma bought him a little toy mater truck. You would press the button on the top of its head, and the engine part would open to a flashlight, and it would say something from the movie. It also was an RC car. Like the orange RC car, it would often activate on its own, and even sometimes without batteries. But when I was 13 to 14, I was sitting in my stepdad's recliner when the beanbag started moving. My mom is to the left of me on the couch. Thinking it was the cat, we ignored it. Then, quite literally, I was attacked. My mom had a 3-tiered bin storage thing on the entrance to the kitchen right by where the recliner was. On top sat a green bin that you would use for organizing paper, and when I tell you that thing flew at my head suddenly, I can't even begin to express how hard it hit me. I had a goose egg on the side of my forehead for a week. There is no explanation to this day that we can think of, and my mother would back me up 10 toes down. After it happened, we went and sat outside until my stepfather came home. Now, the reason we think this is a vortex. The energies in the house always changed. They still do change. Sometimes there would be something in the house, sometimes nothing. Occasionally we believed there were multiple spirits, as you could just tell based on the vibes of the house. The house itself is not on any known native land, though I don't believe in that cliche too much. There's no graveyard nearby, and there's not even a church for a good 20 to 30 miles around us. My family isn't religious, and we aren't even big believers in cryptids. But one thing we all agree on is that the house cycles between being haunted and being empty. An entity follows me. I'll start this off by saying my mom has a friend who moved here from Guatemala or Vietnam. I can't exactly remember, but she is psychic or clairvoyant, whichever word you prefer. She was legitimately trained by witch doctors. She can look at a picture and see ghosts no one else can or feel the person's emotions in the picture. She told my mom there's something that protects my sister, and I had asked over 20 times if she ever saw anything that follows me because I've seen and heard so many supernatural things. One day she finally told me there is something that follows me that changes shape. It's either a dog/cat or an old man with a bulbous head and exaggerated forehead. The old man scared the shit out of me because it's like a memory I had forgotten yet still can't pinpoint. I never recall seeing them either. What's even crazier is my mom saw a black panther in the house I lived in a couple years ago. My 9-year-old daughter told me recently one night she thought my dog was standing on top of the coffee table in my old apartment, and when she told him to get off, he didn't move. That's when she realized he was sleeping right by her. One night, when my girlfriend brought her kids over to spend the night in my old apartment, all of the kids were sleeping in the living room. I had 2 futons, and in that exact same spot, my daughter saw the dog on the coffee table. I thought one of the kids was just standing there. All I could see was a black human figure. No details. It's something to note, my living room was pitch black. But this figure was darker. I said, "What are you doing?" At that moment they bent over and walked into the kitchen, never standing back up, just hunched over walking. I thought it was one of the kids just trying to hide in the kitchen, and when I got in there was nothing. Looking back on it, I think the thing changed back into its animal form. I believe it all began when I was approximately 4 years old. One evening, my father instructed me to go to bed, and I was crying uncontrollably, contemplating various excuses to avoid going to sleep. The usual kid stuff. So I'm upstairs crying at the foot of my bed, which is right by this closet I was always terrified of. No reason, it just scared me. It was dark, it had no light bulb, and it was always just creepy to me. After a couple minutes I hear this banging on the other side of the door, like someone knocking on it furiously. I ran downstairs bawling, telling this story, and of course no one believed me. I fell asleep balled up at the head of the bed under the covers. I have asthma, it's hard for me to breathe under covers. That fact reminds me of how scared I was that night. I don't recall how much time it was from that first incident to this next one I'm about to tell, but this was my second paranormal encounter. I'm having a dream in that very same room, in the very same spot. In the dream I'm walking down the basement steps, and I hear this dark, gravelly voice say something I didn't understand. So I said, "What?" And right at that moment this solid black ball of mist comes from the basement up the stairs and goes straight through my chest. I immediately woke up, and it felt like someone had punched me in the chest, but it was like the pain was internal. Not like someone hitting you but like a piercing pain. It's not like it was an asthma attack because I was breathing pretty normally for that situation. I think that's when whatever is attached to me became attached. I have seen the ghost of my maternal grandpa more than 15 times. I saw my other grandpa's ghost twice without ever knowing it was him until I recognized him in a picture at my grandma's. I've seen a 1920s gangster in a pinstripe suit with the tall hat in my hallway. And numerous other encounters, which have led me to the conclusion that I'm sensitive to the paranormal and that thing knew and attached itself to me. After my daughter told me about seeing that ghost, I bought raw black tourmaline beads. I make necklaces out of them because they're supposed to be good for keeping away negative entities. I've made one for each of my kids. I wear a cross and a St. Christopher charm, and I've made a rosary out of different gemstones, all with black tourmaline. I don't ever not wear it. It's only been around 8 months, but I haven't seen or felt anything like that since. Please let me know if anyone would like to hear about my other paranormal encounters. My paranormal experience in a haunted home. This happened quite a few years back, around 2010. I had split up with my ex-GF and needed a place to live. Looking online, I found a great place with excellent commuting links to central London for work. A very quiet village, with literally one shop. Anyway, it was a lodger deal, but for what I paid, it was such a wonderful bargain. A huge 4-bedroom house with a massive garden, conservatory, modern kitchen, cable TV, fast Wi-Fi, etc. It was just me and the landlady, a retired teacher and also a widow of several years, from what I gather. She was very kind and had an almost hippie-ish personality. Background over, let me start with the actual events. The landlady, let's call her Helen, had distant family living in Australia. About 2 months after I moved in, she went to Australia for 3 weeks to visit her family. Great. I thought. I have the place all to myself. A few nights into this freedom, I was downstairs watching some show very late at night. As I sat watching, in my peripheral vision, to my right, I noticed this very strange blurry ball of light. It seemed to be rising up and down very slightly. To describe the size and color, it was approximately the size of a grapefruit. And it was white, with what seemed to be a slight yellowish haze. After a beat, I looked directly at it and saw it literally disintegrate into nothing within half a second. At this point, I dismissed it as a trick of the light or maybe just tired eyes and wasn't particularly spooked or alarmed by it. Fast forward a month. The landlady was back, and I recently started seeing a new girlfriend. I hadn't mentioned any of what I saw to either. For the most part, I'd largely forgotten about it. Anyway, my new girlfriend had stayed at mine for half a dozen times, and for some reason she never wanted to relax downstairs. She always wanted to stay in my room. This bugged me, as I felt really limited and wanted to chill downstairs every now and then. It sparked a row, as I was saying, "What's wrong? Has Helen said something to bother you?" This was when I found out she had a gift. And the first time she came round, she had wondered who the man was that was sitting in the conservatory. She soon enough had realized that the man wasn't real. And revealed to me that most times she went upstairs after coming in, she saw a thick mist halfway up or on the landing. She described it as a column of smoke. Okay, at this revelation of all this, I became very concerned and yes, pretty alarmed at it all. Was she imagining all this, etc.? I didn't notice anything since that orb, but I was inquisitive. She and I took photos of each other in my room. Her pic of me was fine. One of them had a crazy amount of orbs all around her. Same lighting. Same position. Everything. Now I was seriously thinking, damn, there is definitely something up here. I didn't feel threatened but mostly really curious. This, however, was all about to change. I can't recall how much after this it was, maybe a few weeks, but she was staying over in my room. And I woke up to the sound of her being rather distressed from what was a terrible dream. I comforted her by saying that it was all right, just a nightmare, and reassured her that everything would be okay. And we soon drifted back to sleep. I woke up again an hour later, at 3 a.m., a time that seems to be very active for paranormal events. This time I heard her saying, "He's here." I felt this most severe sense of dread overwhelm me. When I sleep, I am usually facing the left side. And she was facing the other side, next to me. I had to fight this huge desire not to look, but a part of me implored me to roll over and see. As I rolled over, I saw the most terrifying sight I'd ever seen. There was a man. Clear as day, considering the time of the night and the available lighting, literally standing next to her. He was tall. And had the most distinctive hair, wild and gray. He was staring at my GF in a very intense manner. The sense of time seemed to be very vague here, but this must have lasted a minute or two, as this apparition then gradually disintegrated into nothing. I was unable to move, speak, or make sense of what happened. Total shock. After it vanished, the room seemed to adopt a lighter vibe. We discussed what happened for quite some time, and I smoked a ton of Bensons to try and calm myself. We both went downstairs early that morning, unable to sleep due to the lights being on. Helen had a little study room, and up until now I'd strictly respected her privacy, but I wanted answers and needed to find out anything that might explain who this man was. So we go inside and within moments see a picture of Helen together with the exact man. Hair, face, everything matched. So, it's her dead husband, then, we discovered. I was unable to spend time there for ages. Practically half moved in with my girlfriend at her flat in London. But there was a need to stay back in my place on occasions, as it wasn't possible to always be at hers. The times I spent in my room always felt uncomfortable. And I always woke up just after 3 a.m. to what seemed to be a very murky kind of atmosphere. Like thick, if that makes sense. The temperature would drop as well, and I knew that he was there. Watching me. I was utterly freaked, and even if I badly needed to use the bathroom, I was too nervous to leave my duvet shelter with the thought he was visible again. I will mention that I told my landlady what happened, and she wasn't really ready to believe me. Saying she hasn't seen or felt any presence of her ex-husband. I wasn't going to press the issue, as it was a sensitive matter. But I decided I had to fully leave the place, still wanting my own space, to find fresh digs. It was about a week or so before I finally moved out that I was there alone on a Saturday. About midday. It was a nice summer day, and the house felt warm and normal. Perhaps this gave me a sense of bravado, as I decided to audibly vent some thoughts. While I was upstairs, I loudly shouted about how annoyed I was and suggested that it might all be a load of crap. I suggested that it might be some freakish hallucination, among other things. Well, as soon as I finished the last word, a colossal banging noise came from downstairs. It was a heavy metallic crash, with a reverberating aftertone. I crapped my pants. What the F was that? I thought. I had to go downstairs, especially now that I had to leave the house and go somewhere to get away. I go downstairs, and literally in the hallway by the front door was an ornate, silver antique serving tray. This tray was always on the dining room table. It usually had a wooden bowl on it with fruit inside. Now, two things were evident. This tray had clearly been picked up and thrown to the floor in a section some distance from where it originated. Secondly, this spirit was angry and displaying its strength. I was done. I telephoned Helen while staying with my GF and told her I would be there to drop off the keys, and if she wasn't there, I'd put them through the letterbox. I didn't tell her what just happened, but that I needed a fresh place to stay. That following weekend, I was there with my GF packing the car with my possessions. Helen wasn't there, so it was just the two of us. My GF was upstairs grabbing a few light bags of clothing and came running downstairs saying, "He's whipped me." I was like, "What?" And yes, she lifted her top, and there it was. About half a dozen red lash marks across her back. I said, "Wait in the car," and I ran upstairs, grabbed what was left, and shoved the keys through the letterbox. Never returned. Some paranormal experiences in my childhood home. Growing up, my house was haunted. Just to preface, we moved into my childhood home when I was in the 2nd grade. My parents transferred within their jobs, and we went from a big city into a small, rural town. They wanted us to grow up in a nicer area. My mother has a history of paranormal encounters since she was a child, not sure if this is relevant, but we have strong Native American ancestry, and when we initially came to check out the house, we stayed in a local Motel 6. After visiting the house and returning to the Motel 6, my mother woke up in the middle of the night with an instinctive urge to check on me. She said that she saw a dark figure just standing over me while I was sleeping on the bed. After a few moments, she said that it almost seemed she noticed it standing there, and it disappeared. Years later, my mother told me she had a dream in which her mother visited her. My grandmother passed away before 2001 if I'm not mistaken. I was too young to have anything but fleeting memories of her, sadly. She often spoke about how her mother had visited her in dreams before, but never once had she spoken to her. My grandmother was always silent in her dreams. One dream in particular, though, my mother said her mom showed up in her dream, pointed towards my room down this long hallway we had, and said one thing: "That room is haunted." I don't particularly hold a lot of faith in dreams myself, but when it comes to my mother, I understand that she doesn't bullshit me with stuff like that. Regardless of its significance, the message resonated deeply. One morning during the 8th grade, while I was getting ready for school, my class started at 8:30 a.m., whereas my sister, who was in the 9th grade, had to be at her school by 8 a.m. sharp. My dad had left with my sister to get her to school on time, leaving only myself and my mother in the home. My mother was working graveyard shifts at the time, so she was in her room sleeping up on the second floor, which was on the opposite end of the house. I was basically alone. I was standing in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard my dog walking in. When I turned to greet him, a woman moved right by the open door. Not an ethereal being or a shadow, she looked to be a flesh and blood woman. I shit you not. I can still remember everything about how she looked. She had auburn brown hair that went down just past her freckled shoulders. She was wearing a white nightgown that ended right above the knees, and it had a sort of lace pattern for the shoulder straps and lining the bottom. She was a white woman but had a slight tan, maybe in her mid-30s up to mid-50s. I had to guess her age. The weirdest part was she wasn't walking, she sort of just floated past the door, and her legs faded out into nothingness. I could see her knees/legs, but once you got halfway down her calves, there was just nothing there, no signs of ambulation, just floating past. I could have easily mistaken this incident for an actual human being breaking into my house and walking around had it not been for the disturbing manner in which she moved. The worst part is she was going right towards the direction of my bedroom. My room was maybe 3 or 4 feet away from my bathroom. The bathroom was halfway down the hallway. I sat there in the bathroom with my dog until my father got home, and I didn't tell my parents for at least a month. Another time I was sleeping on my living room couch back in high school. I slept on the couch through high school. I had too many strange occurrences to warrant sleeping in my bedroom, when I heard someone, or something, walk from my kitchen into my living room. I'm talking about hearing the weight of the footsteps on the different surfaces, i.e., laminate flooring in the kitchen. It walked right up to the side of the couch and just stood there. I could literally feel a presence right there, almost like when an individual is standing super close to you but not touching you, yet somehow you can still physically feel them. Imagine standing in a crowded train on the subway where everyone is just packed in, the way you can feel the crowd, even though nobody is actually touching you. I guess that's how I describe it. I couldn't tell you what it was, I kept my eyes closed the whole time. All I can say is I had a really bad feeling about that energy. I had never felt anything like it. It was offensive. It unsettled me. Third different occasion here, but one time my entire family had gone to the movie theater and I was home alone. I had been in my room playing Modern Warfare 2 with some friends online, and I had a headset on, meaning I could hardly hear anything aside from the game/chat. I had the volume just low enough that I could tell when they got home. I thought I had heard what sounded like my front door slam, the way the house reverberates, and people talking. I looked over towards my bedroom door and could see the light from the kitchen through the crack at the bottom. As I looked at the light, I noticed a shadow that resembled someone walking through the kitchen, similar to how a person in front of a light source casts a shadow. I figured they must have arrived back home, so I took off the headset, walked out of my room, and said, "Hey, how was the movie?" Nobody was home. Safe to say that freaked me out a bit, but I had grown accustomed to freaky things happening in that house. I just sat back down and continued playing LOL. When in doubt, ignore it Lamau. I continued to see the shadows moving in the kitchen and heard movement until they got back from the movies maybe an hour later. We did have animals at the time, at least 2 dogs and a cat, but I could easily tell the difference between their shadows and a human shadow, and they usually stayed on the opposite end of the house when my folks weren't home. I had too many smaller incidents to count throughout the years. A few times I'd be sitting in my living room with a friend and we'd both hear something heavily walking down the set of stairs that was no more than 6 feet away from us, or hear my name being called, etc. But these were some of the more in-your-face events I've experienced that I can't explain. I'm not religious, so I don't particularly believe in angels and demons and souls being trapped and everything else associated with the stereotypical image of a ghost, but I'm damn sure there is some shit out there we haven't figured out yet. If you ask me, There are definitely benevolent and malevolent energies, but what those energies are I couldn't tell you. I was sitting in my living room in the winter farting around on my laptop at midnight. I was neither drinking nor using any drugs. All of a sudden I hear a loud crashing sound come from one spot on my roof. The sound was so loud it physically shook the house with a thud. I felt it. The laptop even shook from it. It sounded like something really heavy landed on my roof. From the location of this thud, I then hear footsteps of something heavy running on my roof, like a 300-pound man running up and down the roofline. Unmistakable human footsteps. I know what animals sound like on a roof. This was someone walking. I could literally follow the footsteps of where this person was walking from front to back. At this point I am thinking burglar. Or some crazy person hopping roof to roof and trying to break in. I thought I was in actual danger. I decided to investigate. So I grabbed a giant maglite flashlight, which could be used like a bat if push came to shove, and an antique military battle shield in case someone charged at me. Don't judge, it's all I had. So I ran into my driveway, yelling, "Hey! Get off my roof!" Hoping to get the jump on the perp or to scare them away. Because it's winter, I have snow on my roof. I also have a clear view of the entire roofline from my driveway. I'm expecting to see someone, or footprints, or a crash spot for whatever hit my roof. But there is nothing. All I could see was pure undisturbed snow. There was zero physical evidence for what just occurred, and then I got real freaked out. It was impossible for there to be no impact mark or tracks. What can physically shake my house and walk on my roof without leaving any physical signs? I then started yelling out loud. WTF? WTF is going on? WTF was that? Making matters worse. A neighbor was driving by exactly as this happened. Here I am holding a military shield in one hand and a giant maglite in the other, sweeping my roof with light and yelling at absolutely nothing there. My neighbor slowed down their car, gave me a disapproving look, and continued driving slowly to their house. Do I blame my neighbor? Nope. After all, it's perfectly normal for someone to be outside, at midnight, in snowy winter, with a battle shield, in their boxers, sweeping their roof with a giant light, and yelling at someone or something that is not there. Totally perfectly normal behavior, right? I still can't believe the neighbor didn't call first responders on me for a mental wellness check. To this day, I have no explanation for what shook my house and ran on my roof. It still really freaks me out. My paranormal experiences. I lived in a small town when I was in elementary school and my parents were still married. My dad, mom, older sister, and I lived in a fairly small house, but we loved it. That was until things got scary. It all started when I went to one of my school friends, Morgan's, birthday parties. We were all having fun just sitting around and talking about whatever elementary girls talk about, and then all of a sudden her mom walks in wanting to play a board game. All of the girls get really excited and eager to play, so the mom decides to search for something good. She looks in her closet and pulls out a Ouija board. None of us girls knew what it was at the time, but Morgan looked absolutely terrified. I wasn't sure what to expect, so I kind of just went with what everyone else was doing. The mom has a huge smile on her face, as she always did, and she turned off the lights. We all started giggling, but then things started to get a little strange. She brings out a strobe light, and we begin to play the game. I was still perplexed but was still having a pretty fun time. I look over and see Morgan's face completely terrified, as if she just saw a demon. She starts crying and screaming, begging her mom to put it up until finally her mom agrees. Afterward everything was pretty normal. I went home and didn't experience anything crazy until a couple months later. My sister and I rode home on the bus after school, and the walk from the end of the street, where we were dropped off, to our house was a good 15 to 20 minute walk. When we made it home, we realized that our back door was wide open. This concerned us because our parents were always very diligent about making sure that door stayed locked when everybody was gone. I start to get a little scared as we get closer, as I see dirty footprints leading inside, almost as if they're taunting me. I ask my sister, Michaela, what we should do. As my mind is thinking of the worst possible situation, my sister simply walks inside and says, "Come on." She's obviously the braver sibling. I agree, so I walk inside. She shuts the door behind me and makes sure it's locked. After that, we do our regular routines after school. Make a snack, turn on some cartoons, and try to accomplish our homework. After we've both settled down from that odd experience, we hear a noise coming from our kitchen. Realizing that the radio has somehow turned on by itself, my heart sinks. This was a very old radio, so I figured maybe it was just messed up. I get scared to get near the kitchen, so I make my sister do it. She hesitates but manages to turn it off. I call my mom on our home phone and ask her if that happens often. She sounds a little concerned and tells me, "No, that's never happened. Is everything okay?" I tell her we're fine and hang up. As I'm writing this, stuff is falling around my room, lol. A couple of weeks later things are pretty normal, nothing too crazy, just lights flickering, objects being moved, and another occasion of the door being opened. Michaela and I stayed in our camper until our parents got home because we both had a bad feeling. That is until one night I went to sleep, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't move, and I could hardly breathe, but my eyes were wide open. I see a black figure in the hallway. It starts to slowly move closer to me. I want to move, I want to scream, but I can't do anything. It moves to my face, then it walks around my bed, keeping eye contact the whole time. Even though it had no eyes or facial features, I knew it was looking at me. It moves incredibly slowly until it gets right next to my face. All I remember is hearing a slight fuzzy sound and falling asleep almost instantly. I didn't remember that this had occurred until years later, but thankfully it turned out to be just sleep paralysis. After I experienced that, things got worse. I would wake up in the middle of the night unable to breathe. It felt as though something was choking me. I would always run to my parents' room crying and hyperventilating. My dad would always pick me up and try to calm me down until I could breathe normally again. This went on for several months. My mom would give me breathing treatments to try and help, and eventually this problem went away. This experience might not be paranormal, but I felt it was worth adding to see if anyone else has similar experiences. My sister and I were scared to sleep alone, so we slept in my dad's room after my parents divorced when I was about 7. One night, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night and looked into the hallway. From my dad's room, I had a perfect view of it. I see what looks to be an aura, some sort of light in a light green color. It floats throughout the hallway, and it looks so lost. It would walk into my room and then my sister's, then into our bathroom, and just alternate over and over again. This went on for about 30 minutes until it took a turn into our kitchen and vanished. I didn't feel scared by the presence of this, more intrigued than anything. And finally, my last experience at this house, which in my opinion is the scariest. Michaela and I were in our dad's room again, ready to go to sleep. Things got uncomfortable when all three of us piled up in his bed, so I decided to make a pallet on the ground. We all fell asleep. Hours pass, and suddenly I feel a slight tapping on my head. I was lying on my left side, but I could tell something was hovering over me. At first I thought it could have been my sister, but I heard them both snoring from the bed. I was frozen in fear, and I couldn't scream. The tapping went on for about an hour, and it was unbearable. The feeling of not knowing what could happen next is terrifying. I somehow managed to fall asleep, and when I woke up the next morning, I scanned the room and saw it completely empty. I bolt out of my dad's room to find my sister eating cereal and watching cartoons. I start crying, trying to explain what happened last night. She looked extremely concerned, and I could tell I was scaring her with what I was saying. She told me to just tell my dad when he got home from work, which I did. However, my dad played it off, saying it could have just been a curtain blowing on my head. I decided to show him where I was lying and how that would have been impossible. He said it was all in my mind, and I just needed to calm down. After that, weird experiences have still happened to me, and they won't be stopping anytime soon. Sleep with covers over your head, you never know what could be watching you. I never fully believed in ghosts until encounters started happening more frequently. So let me start by saying I know people aren't going to believe me, and that is okay. I just want to share my possible experiences with the paranormal. Anyway, I first learned about ghosts when I was in 2nd grade after my friend told me about them. Because I had never seen one, I brushed it off and told my friend I didn't believe in ghosts. My friend responds by jokingly saying, "You shouldn't have said that, now they are going to haunt you." I chuckled slightly, but my friend seemed serious even though they delivered the comment in a sarcastic manner. Later on that night, I was frightened and thought something was going to happen, but alas, nothing happened, so I realized there was nothing to worry about, and ghosts aren't real. But then, something happened that to this day I still can't explain. Almost a year after I first learned about ghosts, I had my first possible encounter. So it was nighttime, and I was getting ready to go to bed, but first I had to brush my teeth. My mom was in the bathroom helping my little brother brush his teeth. Anyway, as I made my way up the stairs, I then made a U-turn. Basically, when you reach the top of the stairs, you can walk straight into my room or make a U-turn to go down the hall. On the right side of the hall is the bathroom, and at the end is my parents' room. As I made the U-turn, I could see my dad lying in bed, along with our 2 dogs lying in the room as well, but then I heard a noise that made me run for it. It sounded like someone was chasing me. I can vividly remember that I could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer. Whoever or whatever it was coming from my room. I bolted for the bathroom door and opened it as I fell onto the bathroom floor. Before I said anything, my mom said something like, "What is wrong with you tonight? You have been up here making noise for the past 5 minutes." Again, this was a while ago, so that might not be exactly what she said. I then asked what noise, and she responded with something like, "You have been in your room messing with something, then you ran through the halls for a bit and went back to your room." I immediately say I did not and get my dad up from his sleep so he can check the house because I came to the conclusion that someone had broken in. We found nothing, no evidence someone broke in. Furthermore, I didn't tell them someone broke in, all I said was I think someone is in the house. If it was a thief, they were skilled because nothing was stolen or out of place. Fast forward about 6 years from this. I was just starting 9th grade and homeschooling simultaneously. A couple of months into homeschooling, I found myself home alone. So I go upstairs to use the bathroom, and then as I am about to come down the stairs, I hear voices. It sounded like 2 adult males speaking to each other in another language. Anyway, in no circumstance should anyone do what I did. I decided to just walk down the steps and see who it is. Yes, that was extremely stupid, and I am so lucky it wasn't really robbers. Somehow the radio turned on, and it didn't even sound like music. Now I won't lie, it was a Bluetooth radio, so maybe someone outside connected their phone to it, but still, it was creepy nonetheless. About 2 weeks later it turns on again, and no audio or anything is playing. Now the radio is always plugged in, but I thought you had to manually turn it on, but I guess not. Now I will share the actual, or at least possible, ghost encounters. On Halloween night, yes, it was a Halloween night. This was the first Halloween I stayed home. Anyway, my mom and little brother and dad are all home. Now this picture of my mom and dad was hanging on the wall. It's been there for years. We never took it off the wall or anything. I see my dog staring at it with a growling look on his face. The next thing you know, the picture goes flying forward off the wall. My German Shepherd ran away scared. My mom and dad rejected my ghost idea, even though the thing went forward by a good amount instead of falling straight down. So far, everything can be explained without invoking the paranormal, but the picture incident is definitely intriguing. About a year after the picture incident, something occurred that surpassed all my other potential encounters and made me reconsider my disbelief in ghosts. It was early morning, and I was the only one downstairs. I don't know exactly what I saw. The best way I can explain it is a possible apparition. Anyway, the thing was white, I guess a little pale, but I saw it in the corner of my eye, so I turned towards it, and it walked behind a doorway/entranceway to the kitchen. I got up and went in there. Again, it was stupid of me since it could have been an intruder. I ran into the kitchen, and once again I found nothing. Anyway, recently something else happened. At the end of 2020, around November or the beginning of December, only me and my little brother are home. That's when I hear what vividly sounded like several footsteps coming out of my parents' room and stopping in the hall by the bathroom. My German Shepherd heard them and started to go up the steps, and I followed him up. I searched all of the upstairs and found nothing. The next day I heard more footsteps, except when they reached the bathroom, they stopped and moments later returned to my parents' room. This time only I was in the house. I ran up the stairs to see what or who it was and found nothing. A few days later my dad heard what sounded like someone walking in the attic. He went up there, and I followed behind because I was curious. We found nothing. My dad still won't accept the paranormal explanation and said it was probably birds or something. So what exactly is happening in my house? Well, I do not know. The only thing I do know is that the paranormal activity is increasing gradually over time. Hopefully it slowly goes away, but I do not think so. Then again, maybe there are logical explanations for everything that has happened so far. The time I moved out of my parents into a haunted house. When I was 18, I moved into a 2-story townhouse with a friend I graduated high school with and one of their childhood friends. Let's call my high school friend A and their friend B. B had this sketchy boyfriend who acted like a gangster. Even though we lived in Montana, he was living with us basically as well. B and her boyfriend were also pretty Christian. They said they never experienced any of the things that A and I had. We moved into this townhouse, built in the early 2000s, in January and stayed there for approximately 6 months. When we first moved in, we were super happy in the house. A and I were setting everything up, enjoying living in our space for the first time. B was not highly engaged. They spent the majority of their time either working or in their room watching movies or arguing with their boyfriend. It wasn't until about a month into living there that I and A separately started to hear footsteps when we were alone in the house. At first I thought it was because we were in a townhouse, but I quickly realized when we did hear the other side of the house, it was obviously coming from the other side of the wall, which was rare. These footsteps sounded exactly like when someone was walking around upstairs or downstairs on our side, depending on wherever you were. The first time I heard them, I was in the living room playing Xbox Home Alone, and I heard the steps start to go from room to room above me. It scared me, so I went upstairs to see if maybe B's boyfriend was here, but all the doors were closed because B had a little dog that would rip your panties apart if you let it in your room. The steps sounded like they were going into each room, without any doors opening or closing. A and I talked about it a lot soon after it started, and it's almost like that attention, knowing that we were talking about it, made more things happen, of course. At night we started to hear the steps in the hallway outside our bedroom doors. A and I had rooms right next to each other. And it was the most unsettling thing. It resembled precisely the sound of someone walking barefoot on carpeting. How you kind of hear the carpet brush against the rough skin of the bottom of your foot. A would contact me late at night while I was lying in bed, straining to listen to these footsteps, asking if I could hear them as well. Generally I'd always text back that I was hearing it too. It was a nightly thing. I feel like saying until moving into that house I had had a few paranormal experiences that I had written off as a child's imagination because they scared me so much, but with these things I suddenly felt like I couldn't write anything off like that. It felt intensely personal and incredibly real. The footsteps started to sound more rushed over time. My room was above the kitchen, and I could hear the steps shake things in cupboards at night when it was really quiet. I always knew it wasn't any of my roommates because it was obvious when they'd open their door to walk around for something. Then in March, A and I had a friend over, hanging out late one night at the house all alone. B and her boyfriend were at a party. Our buddy didn't drive, so A left to drive him home. I cleaned up a bit and went up to my bedroom. I left the hallway light on upstairs because I'd started to always feel a weird, off feeling in there, and it was just a generally dark hallway, especially at night. From my room I suddenly heard the bathroom door slowly start swinging closed. I was lying in bed, and from the view I had of the hallway, I clearly saw the doorknob peek out against the wall as the door closed. Then it slowly swung back open. The sound of the door slowly opening at an agonizing pace will forever remain etched in my mind. I felt absolute fear, because I knew for a fact that I was home alone. The wait for A to get back home was terrible. I sat in my bed frozen until they came up the stairs. I ran out to meet them, feeling confident that it was two of us home now. I started to explain what happened and what I saw. I even moved the door slowly open and closed to replicate the creepy sound it made. And then it happened. Standing there mid-sentence telling my story, something started to pound obscenely loud against the wall behind us. We panicked, ran into my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed together in terror until B got home later that night. We were still totally shaken while we told her what happened, and she kind of brushed us off. They spent the night in her room because her boyfriend didn't seem to care either. Reluctantly we went to bed in our rooms that night, and the next day we went outside to look at the part of the house that the sound had come from, and there was no mark, no damage, despite it sounding so destructively loud. There weren't any trees in our yard or the neighbor's yard, and no branches or anything on the ground that would indicate something had struck the house to make the sound we heard. We smudged the house that week, and everything stopped until May. Some roommate drama went down when B told us we had a month to pack up and find a new place because she was moving in with her boyfriend and ending the lease. Now, 6 years later, I fully understand that the tension and anger in the house at that time provided whatever pounded on the wall that night with enough energy to make a full comeback. The footsteps started running nightly again, occasionally this time. I could hear them linger at our doors more too, almost as if to taunt us, saying, "I might come in." Then one day when I was at work, A called me in a panic. Now a bit of background about A, they are by far one of the most grounded, steady-headed people I've ever met. They didn't show much emotion or fear during some of our high school shenanigans, so I knew something was up when they called me. They told me over the phone that they were just in bed watching something with somebody they had over when both A and their guest noticed that the foot of the bed started to lift up. It slammed down, and the guy left after that, I'm pretty sure. A showed me when I got home that night what it looked like when the foot of the bed was lifted, and I just can't imagine any rational explanation for what would cause something like that to happen. Things continued being creepy and loud at night. Then my last night in the house rolled around, and the ghost decided to give me quite the send-off. A had gotten a job doing trail conservation and was on a hitch, while B was at her new apartment, which left me home alone and holed up in my room for the night because I was a little scared of our ghost. I was trying to fall asleep when I heard the usual footsteps start doing the rounds around the house. And then they went straight to my door and stopped. I felt very unnerved by that, but then I heard a soft knock at my door. The dread I felt in that moment is still the most intense I've ever felt in my life. It had never knocked on our doors or anything before. I sure as hell wasn't going to answer. I tried to focus on sleeping and ignoring it, but then I literally felt like someone was in my room. It felt like a physical presence, and all I could do was lie in bed frozen with my eyes shut tight. I felt the side of my bed shift and press down as if someone had slowly laid down next to me, and my heart was caught in my throat. All I could do was lie there. I was too afraid to open my eyes or do anything. I felt like I would rather not see what was next to me. For a long time I lay awake feeling that weight next to me. It never lifted or went away. Somehow, I fell asleep, probably exhausted by all the fear, and when I woke up, there was no one in my room with me. After all that, A and I briefly resumed our roommate arrangement a year later, during which we would discuss our experiences. It was gratifying to share our own haunted house stories. I guess it still does. I always have my 2 cents to give when the paranormal stories start getting swapped. But when it was happening, I was frightened. I kept trying to write things off as my imagination or the house settling, or who knows, but just always felt like what I was experiencing was real, and it was really happening. The footsteps were too uncanny. I still hear the way they sounded in my head 6 years later. Things we experienced in the haunted vineyard house. I would like to tell about a frightening paranormal event I experienced before. Under normal circumstances, I never tell it, but I feel the need to tell young people, who are very curious about these events, as a lesson. People often say that excessive curiosity can lead to negative consequences. Excessive curiosity is not a good thing. I'm 25 now. However, I was 20 years old when I experienced the event I'm going to tell. It seems like people in those ages can be quite bold due to ignorance. 5 years makes a person mature. I learned it this year. As a friend group of 4 to 5 people, we visited the vineyard house, which belongs to the father of one of our friends. It was summer, and the weather was nice. It was almost evening when we arrived at the vineyard house. This was because we hit the road late. After all, we were planning to spend the night there. We immediately prepared the barbecue when we arrived home, and we chatted in joy and peace until 24:00. Although it was late, we were still enjoying tea in the open air on the porch of the house. One of us threw the bread and leftovers from our feast right across the exit gate of the garden, right at the bottom of a rock. One of our other friends urinated on the same rock where we left the leftovers. One of us threw the remaining embers from the barbecue to the same place. As if that wasn't enough, one of us poured water on the embers that had been thrown around the rock. Of course, we didn't know that we should do all these events in those times. It was our ignorance. 1. Meanwhile, I would like to note that none of us used any alcohol or any substance during these. There was another house about 100 to 150 meters away from ours. It was a ruined house with no one living in it and located on the mountainside. It was a completely abandoned and forgotten property. While we were enjoying our tea on the porch, suddenly, the lights of this dark house turned on. We were far away from the city. It was impossible that homeless punks or junkies would be living in that house. Furthermore, as far as we know, no electricity was provided to that house since no one was living in it. We were even supplying electricity with a generator since there was no permanent residence in our house. Imagine what a place it is. Although it was a mysterious event, what was frightening was not the sudden turning on of the lights in that house. It was the thing that was looking at us from the window. It was looking like a human, but without any exaggeration. His arms were 1 meter long. He had a small head with quite wide ears, but he was short. He was staring at us without taking his eyes off. When we noticed it, we started to look at each other in silence. However, everyone already understood that it was one of them, Jinn. None of us reacted suddenly or unusually since we didn't want to scare or panic each other. The man was hitting his face and watching us. From time to time, he was looking right and left and then started to stare at us again. They were all remarkably strange and meaningless actions. As I said, we all tried to keep our silence as we promised to each other. However, I was frozen. I almost lost consciousness due to fear. That creature made a strange sound suddenly. It was like he was calling us. Suddenly, everyone got up in fear and panic. We went to the car quickly and drove away from there at full speed. No one talked to anyone along the way either. As I said at the beginning of my story, people had some kind of crazy courage due to ignorance in those ages. In the morning we gathered with our friends. We talked about what we experienced the night before. As a result, we also called our friend, whose nickname is Hoja since he knows more than us in religious matters. In the evening, we went to that house together again. However, it was around 10 p.m. this time. Our goal was to drive the jinns away as if it were our duty. Our friend, Hoja, started to recite prayers there. There was also a dog next to us at that moment. The dog started to howl bitterly. Then, that creature appeared at the window again. But this time, everyone was nearly immobilized. The Hoja was the first one who ran away, and we followed him. The dog was running with us too. We entered the car, but it didn't start. We pressed the pedals again, but this time, our friend forgot the handbrake. The dog also started to howl like a human. We started to run away, and you would burst into tears if you could see us. I wish God would not let anyone experience an event like this. The one we called Hoja was about to faint. We left him at his house, and he ran into the building. We were still terrified even though we were in the heart of the city. Our family elders, to whom we told our stories, found a real Hoja, who is experienced in these events, and he treated us with his breath. Treating with breath, it is the process of reading some verses in the Quran and healing prayers next to the person to protect him from the evil eye, jinns, etc. Later on, those creatures left us alone. Otherwise, they would take us away that day. I highly recommend not being bold in these events, no matter what. Meanwhile, according to what we learned later on, the owner of that house ended himself there. The reason why we were haunted was that we left leftovers and embers and urinated on them. We learned that leftovers are the food of jinns and that things such as embers and pouring water hurt jinns. 1. Things to avoid doing in the evening hours because of jinns. According to the common belief in Turkey, you should not throw the trash or embers out, pour hot water, or urinate in the evening outdoors. It is believed that all these may hurt or disturb the jinns, and as a result, they will take revenge by hurting those who perform these events. The time I stayed a few nights in an empty house. Back around 1991, my then girlfriend and her family moved out of state. They had packed up their entire house and put it on the market. This was during the recession, and her dad got a really great offer out of state that he couldn't refuse. They live on the other side of town from me, in the older area of town, but it's nice. The homes were huge and kind of ranch style with huge lots. Their home was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house with a detached garage and a huge driveway that fit their boat and RV, and they were not really that close to neighbors, meaning that the plots of homes were not spaced too close together. I remember the house had one huge tree out front that covered most of the front driveway and over to the garage. The backyard had 2 or 3 smaller trees. I remember one of them was a fruit tree, maybe oranges. When they packed up everything, I was helping them pack their home up, and when I was doing so, her dad pulled me aside to the porch with her mom. Her dad had asked me if he could trust me with something. I knew her parents loved me and trusted me, so I wasn't sure what they wanted, but I would have done anything for them. They asked me to stop by every few days to check on the house until the realtor sells it. Her dad handed me the key and requested, if you could also help us clean up the place. Then he began to offer me some cash, but I declined, saying I would be happy to do it for them. I knew they were going through a tough spot, so I told them not to worry about anything and that I would clean and make sure that everything was okay. He seemed really worried about leaving the house alone. He said if you could maybe stay a night or two just so people don't think the place is abandoned. He said that the guy across the street is on vacation and he was the only neighbor he could trust. During that time, there were issues of people breaking into foreclosed homes and removing appliances and squatting. I told him for sure that I would plan on spending a few nights there a week or whatever. He said to call if you need anything, but it would take them a few days to get to their new place. Her dad had a cell phone, but back then it wasn't like today, but he gave me my GF's grandmother's phone number and said she would know how to get in touch with them. The first few days I did as they asked. I tidied the kitchen and bathrooms, vacuumed all surfaces, and subsequently began addressing additional tasks such as cleaning the windows and wiping down the walls and other areas. The first night I stayed the entire night. I told my parents that I was going to work all night. It was like on a Friday, and I had planned to come back home the following morning. There was a cot, a radio, and a few lights, nothing else. I decided to sleep in my GF's old room. Part of me just missed her at that point, and I didn't know how long it was going to be till I saw her again. I fell asleep with the radio playing low in the room, and I had left a couple of lights on, the kitchen light and the front bathroom light, if I remember correctly. During the first night, I woke up in the middle of the freezing cold. It was fall, and temps could dip down at night, but this felt like something else. It felt like a cold from some kind of source, like being inside a fridge. I got up and turned on the house heater and went back to the cot and bundled up with my sleeping bag. When I got home the next night, I mentioned to my friend about how cold it got the night before. Apparently it wasn't a cold night. Over the following days I would stop by the house during the day and check on the house. I would take the time to finish up my homework and then go home. I think the next time I slept over was on a Thursday night. I remember because I had school the next day and planned out how I was going to get to school from their house, as they lived further from my school than I did. I got to their house later in the evening. It was almost dark. This time I had brought a little camping TV that was black and white and had bunny ears. just so I could have a little entertainment. However, the TV didn't want to get a signal in my GF's old room, so I moved to their den. Their den was like an add-on. It must have been a patio at some point or something because you could tell it wasn't part of the original house. I set up my cot, brought a thermos of hot chocolate, turned on my TV, and began to fall asleep while watching it. I heard a noise coming from the other side of the house. It resembled the sound of a broom handle leaning against the wall, falling over, and sliding down. That is what it sounded like. I got up to go check what made that noise. I didn't see anything unusual. The broom and mop were still upright in the kitchen pantry. I then went to the bathroom to go pee, and I swear I heard someone whisper, like saying a sentence. I remember what her dad said about watching out for people trying to break in and steal stuff. So I ran around the house turning on all the lights. Many rooms didn't have ceiling lights, so I turned on what I could. I turned on the backyard lights and porch lights and checked all the doors. Everything was locked, and nothing was open. I go back to the den, and my little TV is off. I know I left it on, and I started getting the creeps. I can honestly say I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day at school I told a couple of friends about it, and they wanted to come over, but I told them that her dad had asked me not to have people over or throw a party or anything, and I wouldn't have anyway. I was split between asking a friend to join me or keeping my word. I decided to keep my word. The next few days I only checked into the house, and that Sunday my GF called me at home. She asked me how I was doing. She was talking about their road trip to their new house. I was somewhat quiet, which prompted her to ask me, "Okay, what's wrong?" Besides my telling her that I missed her. I didn't want to seem like I was some kid scared of being home alone. I told her to let her dad know that I stayed over a few times and went to check on the house almost every day. I believe I also reminded them to cancel their subscription, as the paper was still being delivered. She then says, "Any issues being alone there?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Nothing is bothering you." I told her, "Well, I got a really cold spell in her room, and I had heard noises, and I swear I heard whispering." She said, "Yeah, I figured you would find out." I said, "Kathy, what are you talking about?" She said, "Well, remember how I told you I never liked to be home alone?" I said, "Yeah, sometimes she would call me over when her parents were not home so that she wasn't home alone." I said, "Is your house haunted or something?" She replied, "Well, I'm not sure if it is haunted, but there is definitely something there. We would hear noises and see things." She went on to tell me stories about how when she was a kid and they moved in there, she would run to her parents' room and sleep at the edge of their bed. I was like, "Oh, okay, great, thanks for telling me," she said. "I didn't want you to think I was weird." She said, "Oh, my dad said you don't have to stay the night there anymore. The neighbor across the street is back from vacation, and he will keep an eye on the place at night. However, he asked if I still wouldn't mind going by at least every other day." I kept that up for a few days, making sure to hit the house only during daylight time. As the weeks went on, the days got shorter, and one evening, I arrived at the house after 7. It was already dark outside. I opened the front door, turned on some lights, and went to use the restroom. While facing the toilet, I noticed that the bathroom had a mirror spanning the entire wall, allowing me to see into the hallway from there. Suddenly, I saw something really fast go by the wall, and I yelled out, "Hello." I left the house in a hurry. I left the bathroom light and the hall light on. A day later, Kathy's dad asked if I left a light on because the neighbor saw that the lights were on and saw me inside. I said, "Yeah, I stopped by about 7, checked on everything, and left." He said no, that this was at 11 p.m. I said no, it wasn't me. I went there a few more times, then the realtor took over and sold the house to a company that bought up homes. I was so glad not to have to go back anymore. I think I had an entity attached to me, and I'm scared it's coming back. This is going to sound like bullshit to most people and also be long as hell, but I wanted to share my experience. Unsure if it's paranormal, but it's got some weird ghost shit going on. Ever since I could speak, I would always threaten to end myself somehow. Yeah, everyone does it, but I can imagine being a mother and having your 4-year-old daughter threaten to lie in the road so a car will hit her is terrifying. Anyways, that was constant until I was about 6, and it just stopped. Suddenly my older sister started doing the same. I grew up in a very hippie family, and my mom was convinced we were possessed. My mom took my sister to a hippie doctor a couple years later, and my sister stopped, and it moved back onto me, I suppose. It stayed with me from 11 to 14, keep in mind. My parents were divorced for many years, and my dad lived in the mountains. His house was on the top of the mountain with no other houses around and was also a canyon where many people died immigrating through it, already creepy enough. After my sister got somewhat exorcised, and whatever it was moved back to me, I had sleep paralysis only at my dad's house. I didn't know that it was sleep paralysis at first. I thought I was just dreaming, but I did some research and found out it was pretty common. I remember I had this black IKEA dresser in this corner of my room that turned into a tall figure. I could only see it out of the side of my eye every night though. I never told anyone about it until I was 13, and I was so terrified of going to my dad's house, so I went to my mom. I was honestly surprised she believed me, but then again, she was a hippie who believed in all kinds of stuff. A week after I told her, she took me out of school that day to take me to the doctors. When we got there, it turned out it wasn't actually the doctors, it was the hippie doctor. My mom was so convinced that we were possessed by something, and obviously, being 13, that scared the shit out of me. We got in there, and I lay on a table. He told me to close my eyes and rest. He tried to communicate with my subconscious through my arm, but I felt stupid and thought it was bullshit. He decided that he would communicate through my mom using my energy. I held my mom's hand as she took my spot on the table and closed her eyes. He began to ask her questions, and I remember her twitching and somewhat convulsing with every question, which made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. At the end of the appointment, he looks at me and tells me that my sleep paralysis is protecting me. That the thing I see out of the corner of my eye isn't a demon, but it's a part of me assuring me that I'm safe. And honestly, that made sense to me. I had a lot of weird experiences at my dad's house that terrified me. It's the same with all my siblings too, they've all seen things. I have 2 half-brothers who are 4 and 5 living there all the time, and I tell them ghosts don't exist and such. One time the younger one was talking to the wall, showing a Lego set that he had built. I asked, "Who's that for?" And he pointed at the corner where he was standing and said, "Madeline." I didn't think anything of that until a couple months later I was sitting with the older one on the couch, and I was messing with him. I asked, "Do you have a girlfriend?" He nodded his head. "What's her name?" I continued. He pointed to the same corner and said, "Madeline." And that was very strange, but as long as they're not sketched out, I won't be either. Anyways, back to the original story. After he told me I was safe, he made me leave the room and talk to my mom for around half an hour. She refused to tell me what he told her. All she told me was it was about my past life. I decided to stop trying to get it out of her and just forget it. My mom had dropped me back off at school. That night I went to my friend's house for a sleepover. She lived in the same canyon as my dad but closer to the city than him. Her house still always terrified me, though. We were watching a movie, and I went to go take off my jewelry in her bathroom, which was 3 floors up from the living room. I ran up there alone and took it off, and out of the corner of my eye I saw something, and I could feel it too. It was peeking in the doorway at me, and it made my stomach twist up. I quickly darted my eyes to whatever it was, and it disappeared, and I ran ducking fast down the stairs and started demanding who was messing with me. They all looked at me terrified, asking what I was talking about, and I realized that I was just making shit up and forgot about it. For 3 years after that I felt completely normal. I also had gotten a new room at my dad's and had no more sleep paralysis. One night I had a super weird dream, though. In the dream I was me but in a different life, and I was constantly being followed by something telling me to hurt myself. In the dream I ended up ending myself, and I ended up in the stars. This astrological figure told me I didn't need to fear anything, that I'd be going into the next life with protection. And I was suddenly brought into the life I'm living. The dream showed events I'd lived and brought me back to the moment where I saw that thing in my friend's house. The moment stopped in slow motion, and I turned to the thing in the doorway, and something whispered, "It's trying to come back," in this terrifying voice. And then I woke up. I ran to my mom and told her about the dream. I also never remember dreams as vividly as I remembered this one, and she told me that my past life is exactly what the hippie doctor had told her when he kicked me out of the room. We both just stared at each other, and I was confused about the other and why my subconscious had let me access that. It's been over a year now since I had that dream, but ever since I had it, I've been having really weird encounters. I'm scared it's going to come back. 30 years of hauntings following me. We moved to the house when I was 5 years old. Suburban England. The previous owner was an elderly man, 70s, who cared for his mother, 100s, in the home until she died in the downstairs room, which my parents converted to a dining room. He was a deeply religious man and donated to every church within a 10-mile radius. My parents still get begging letters 26 years later asking for more money from the churches to ensure his place in heaven. This house, though, something was definitely in there with us. I and my younger brother, for my 20 years in the house at least, repeatedly experienced things well beyond my reasoning. I am an aerospace engineer, extremely scientific and reasoned in everything I come across. I try to explain everything with science, and my brother, being a teacher, always had the mindset for theory-based practicality. If there was no theory, it couldn't be real. My first memories are around 6 or 7 years old, and this specific one would be ever present until around 11. My parents used to make me sleep with the door open so they could check up on me easily. Every night, though, I would wake up, and there was a shadow in the hallway. It didn't watch me or didn't seem interested in me, but it was ever present. In a dark, unlit hallway, a person-shaped outline was darker than the rest of it. I used to hide under my covers until I could drift off to sleep, but when I was 11, I had enough and closed the door on it and never had trouble again. I am now 30 with a family and have a crippling fear of sleeping with any door open in case I see it. TVs in the house always behaved weird when we as a family would come home from a family outing. Almost as if we were being welcomed in, we would walk in the door, and whichever room we went into first, the television would switch on and display static. This was the mid-90s to early 2000s, when we had 5 channels and big boxes on the back of the TV. It was absolutely absurd, but we got used to it. Then, as TVs developed, we got flat screens, and this thing never occurred again. Not until later on, but that's coming up. Now, this one is my brother's, and 18 years later, he still swears by it. I was 12, he was 8. He was looking for my mother and saw her in the dining room sitting looking out the window on the stool that is normally in the corner, wearing a gray shawl, and her normally blonde hair was straw-like now. He called to her, "Mom." No reply. He walked in and prodded her in the back as a clumsy 8-year-old would when needing attention. He says that her head turned around 180 degrees while her body faced the window still, and she was grotesquely old, not my mom at all. He screamed and ran out of the room. This is where I and my mom heard the commotion, screaming, and thumping as he ran into chairs and the table trying to get away. We found him hiding in the downstairs toilet, crying his eyes out. Around the same time as this, when I was 12-ish, it was just me, Mom, and my brother at home whilst my dad was at the pub. We were all asleep. I had spent the whole day taking bricks from the garden and storing them in the loft, to get them out of the way whilst we renovated the garden. It was around midnight when I was woken up by the loudest banging in the loft. My mom had also been woken up by it. We thought all the bricks had been knocked over by a squirrel or something that had gotten in. Terrified, my mom still forced me to have a look in the loft. We didn't have a ladder available, so I got on her shoulders and took a torch and looked around. Nothing had fallen, nothing was out of place. It had sounded like in horror movies when all is tense and quiet and suddenly somebody hammers on the front door with force, making everybody jump. It was that kind of sound. Fast forward to 17, my parents had gone away for a week with my brother, and so I stayed home alone. I was sitting on my computer in my room playing Football Manager 2005 and heard my dad call my name, then my brother called my name, and it sounded urgent, as if something was happening I needed to help with. I came out of my room and shouted, "What?" No response. I got to the top of my stairs when I realized. I was home alone, they were all on holiday. I had a girlfriend at the time, this was our first time alone together. We were on the sofa, cuddling. Suddenly there was a loud bang from the kitchen next door. I checked to find the pinboard, which had been a permanent fixture since we moved in, was on the floor. Thinking the wind must have blown it, no windows open, strange, back up and back to losing my virginity. Nope. Back in the living room, her tights are off and we are progressing. Another bang, this time followed by absolutely booming footsteps, as if somebody had steel boots on, up the stairs and a door slammed shut. Now we absolutely shit ourselves thinking that we have a break-in, so I get her to call the police, and I go up to check. She has no phone signal at all. I check the kitchen, and the calendar is on the floor. I head up the stairs, every single door was open. When my parents left, all doors were closed other than mine and the bathrooms to show not to go in there. Every single door was open, even the cupboards. She had gone for the house phone now, which was disconnected, no service, which really freaked us out. I put the calendar back up in the kitchen, grabbed our shoes, and we ran out of the house and had to get about 200 meters away until she got phone service again and called her mom to pick her up. I went back and found the calendar on the floor again. She never came back round again. Age 22, moved out and lived on an RAF base for around 14 months. In a 200-year-old building, I was put in the West Wing alone whilst everybody else was in the East Wing. Now the place was pretty well kept, but there was zero internet reception or mobile signal, and the only port was for an old school box TV antenna. I took the one from home, left in the loft for some 15 years at this point. I was dating the girl who is now my wife, and she recalls this just as well as me. She was home, but every night for 2 straight weeks I woke up, wide awake as if I had been well rested. I would look at my clock, and it was 3 a.m. on the dot. Literally every night for 14 straight days. On the final night I woke up at 3 a.m. Suddenly there was a noise, 2 people talking in my room. I was so shocked I jumped up, but nothing was there, but the noise was from the blank screen TV. This TV had been unplugged while I moved things around and not put back in. I didn't listen to what it was saying, but I got up and walked towards it. Suddenly the static came on, which made me jump back a bit. The TV said the words loudly, "It's fine," then turned off. Nothing happened again. I never woke up again at 3 a.m. at the base and never experienced a thing there. Age 27, I and my wife moved into a temporary flat before we moved into our current house. 12 apartments with only 1 immigrant family, the rest are unoccupied. We were only there for 6 months, but some of the things that I experienced mentally scarred me. I will only mention 5 of them. The first, my partner was in the bath, and I was in the living room watching TV. I heard her shout my name, so I came to the door and asked what she wanted. She denied calling me. Her voice was from the opposite side of the bathroom, at least 10 steps to the door. I said to her, "Are you okay then? You don't need anything while I'm here?" I hear the lock sliding open while she says from the other side of the bathroom, "Nah, I'm fine." The door opens, and she's lying in the bath. She asks how I got in. We're both puzzled, then we hear her shout my name from the living room where I originally was. We did Halloween at my flat, and one of my friends slept over in the lounge. In the night he texted me, "Why were you banging on the wall above my head all night? You kept me awake." He didn't realize that the wall he was sleeping against wasn't the one against my room, in which I was fast asleep, but the one for the hallway. Third is a minor incident. My brother was sleeping over while the wife was at her parents'. I had a dream that I was in the flat and walking around, but it was cold, so cold, and elsewhere I could hear somebody calling for help. Like somewhere else in the flat, help. I walked into the living room, and my brother was lying there awake, staring at me, in my dream, and then he called my name. I was woken up, he was actually calling my name. I walked in the room, and he was sitting looking in the same direction I had dreamt. He told me that he was woken up by footsteps walking round the flat, and then he was looking, and they were coming towards him, so he called me to wake up and check. Another incident, my wife was getting out of the bathroom, and I thought I would hide in the living room and jump out at her and scare her. I heard the door open, footsteps come down the hallway, and her shadow come down the hallway. This was off because it didn't look like a human. It seemed like a woman with a long bird beak similar to those ancient plague masks moving along without any bodily movement like walking. I was kind of freaked out, so I gave up my plan and looked around my flat to find out why my wife's shadow looked that way. Maybe she was having a drink, maybe she had a towel, etc. I couldn't find her. I went back to the bathroom, and she was still in the shower. The most terrifying for me was when I was lying in bed alone at approximately 9 p.m. and rolled over, and there was a woman in the corner of the room. A white figure about 7 feet in the air. I know this because the face was above the door frame. It was looking right at me, and I felt completely threatened, as if this thing did not like me at all. I could make out the facial features, it was completely clear-cut. Then it started drifting directly at me, downwards towards me in bed, and then it vanished as it got about 2 feet away from my face. I absolutely shit myself. I screamed so loud that my wife came running in. I slept under the covers with a lamp on for about 3 months and couldn't be alone in that room. If I came home from work, I would run and close the door before I could see anything until she came home from work too. Another incident a little bit freaky in that flat. I was talking in my sleep, but it was a full conversation that I have no memory of. It woke my wife up, and she asked what I was doing. I turned to her and said something along the lines of "They're here with us," and then lay down and went to sleep. I moved into my new house after my granddad died. It was his that I purchased off his children. Nothing has happened ever since.